If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this. It's Halloween month, so let's ramp up the spookiness with some terrifying paranormal and creepy horror stories you've never heard before, ones that will give you goosebumps. I was out at our cabin in the remote mountainous wilderness of Colorado with my dad, and had to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. This necessitated a flashlight and shoes because the outhouse was far away. There was no one but me and my dad for miles in any direction. So I thought. I suddenly heard voices in the distance and stopped in my tracks. It seemed to be coming from my right, deep in the woods in the middle of nowhere, a quarter of a mile from the road. Being 11 and unafraid of the world, I foolishly yelled, "Who's out there?" There was silence for a few seconds, then a shouted string of profanity so vulgar it terrified my virgin ears. I stood still for a moment like a terrified rabbit but heard nothing else, so I ran back to the house and woke my dad up. He got up, loaded his gun, and turned all the lights on, but we never heard another sound. To this day, we have not seen or heard another person within 15 miles of the cabin. I was about 7 and my brother was 13, and we still shared a room. I was always afraid of the dark when I was a kid. Periodically I would wake up in the night and call for Mom to come and turn on the hall light to be used as a night light. Much to the enjoyment of my brother. One night in the middle of winter, I woke up, and right before I called out for Mom, I noticed there was a man on the deck that was on the other side of the wall from our bedroom. I froze. I was totally freaked out and tried to scream, but I could only make this high-pitched squeaking sound. The only thing I could do was cry. After what seemed like hours, my dad heard me and came in to see what was wrong. The man was gone, of course, when I told him, and he blew it off as a nightmare until my brother, from under his covers, said that he saw it too. With that, my dad went outside with a shotgun. There were footprints in the snow outside our window and the window of my parents' bedroom. That one took a while to recover from. My family lives in a super rural part of East Tennessee, and we have a family homestead that's been passed down for generations called the Turley House. Legend in the family has it that it was a Civil War hospital, which I can totally see because it's absolutely ancient and creepy. We also have a legend in the family that we're all haunted by a demon, spirit, or god who knows what's called Wool Eyes. He's so prominent in our family's history that he's just a fact of life at this point, so it's not unusual to hear somebody say something like, "Oh, look, Wool Eyes is at it again. He must be upset." One of the creepy experiences I had growing up here is the never-ending rosebush. There were 2 rose bushes in the corner of the house that weren't very big. I have some distinct memories of playing around them and getting absolutely batshit lost in the rose bushes, running in circles for hours and hours at a time. It was sort of like that scene in Spirited Away when Chihiro and Haku are running through the flower hedges. Eventually I would find my way out, but it would be hours later, and my mom would be hella angry that I was gone for so long. I never really thought much of it because of kid logic, but I asked my mom about it years later, and she said that all the kids in the family have stories about getting lost in the same spot. Everybody always blamed it on Wool Eyes, saying he was just having fun messing around. I wish I could go back and explore the house some. It's got some crazy stories through the years. As children, we played in the basement a lot. The floor was open and cement, so we could roller skate around. Also, the walls were either dirt or brick, so we were allowed to shoot BB guns at targets. Basically, I wasn't scared of the basement at all when I was a kid. One day my sister was in a side room that had jars of peaches and pickles. Dirty cellar type room stayed cold even in the summer. She wouldn't let me in, and I was sure she was eating peaches. I could see her feet under the crack of the door, and I stuck my fingers under, and she messed around with my fingers and giggled. I felt that her fingers were wet, and I said, "Don't eat all the peaches, I want some." Then she pushed down on my fingers so hard, and it hurt, and she was grunting and basically freaking out. I started screaming and tugging. Finally, I pulled my hands back, and she was quiet. She then kicked the door really hard. I ran upstairs to tell her, and she was with my mom in the kitchen. It was pretty freaking weird. No one believed me. In fact, my mom just said my imagination had gotten away from me, and I should forget about it. When I was younger, I used to think I was having dreams of an old woman in a blue dress and cat-eye glasses sitting at the end of my bed singing to me. She'd always sing the same song and then leave. One night I followed her into my brother's room. He is younger than me and was around 5. Instead of singing to him, he woke up, and they began talking. After like 20 minutes, my mother came in and asked what we were doing. My brother said, "I'm just talking to the lady in the blue dress." She made us go back to bed. I woke up still thinking it was a dream. My mom told me the next morning she didn't want me sneaking out of bed anymore in the middle of the night to play with my brother. I asked her what she was talking about, and she gave me her version of what she saw the night before. To this day, I believe that was real and that every night that old woman would sing to me. I get goosebumps just thinking about it. She stopped singing to me soon after that, though people in my family still caught my brother speaking to nothing on numerous occasions. A while later, an aunt came to visit from down south and refused to come into our house after seeing an old woman in cat glasses standing in the upstairs window. She came in to ask who was upstairs, then freaked out when my mother told her no one and let her search the house. Alright, so a while back I worked with this guy named Chris. He was relatively trustworthy and told me this story. He grew up in or around Olympia, Washington, and all the kids would screw around in the forest surrounding his neighborhood. This was when he was 11sh, if I remember correctly. Anyway, he's out in the forest with his friends, building forts and making wood swords and the usual, when they all hear this weird noise like something big being pulled or bent over. Sure enough, they turn around, and one of the trees behind them is being bent over by itself like a giant twig. They all watch as the tree just bends and bends until thwack and it's let go like a slingshot. All the kids take off and avoid the forest for a couple weeks afterward. He says he never saw anything weird again, but apparently within the community people told stories about satanic rituals happening in the forest. This happened to a friend of mine many years ago, and I will try to relate it to you as best I can. It was in the 90s, and he was hitching in CA through the Garberville area, heading north. He was picked up by a very heavy guy driving a van. They were heading up 101, and, for those who are familiar with the area, the old Redwood Highway runs fairly parallel to the 101, as parallel as you can get for being in the middle of the redwoods. So it's nighttime, and they are driving along, chatting. The conversation begins to get pretty awkward. I don't recall the details. The driver then hops off of the 101 and begins to take the old Redwood Highway. Now this move makes absolutely no sense, as the 101 is windy enough. The old way even more so. It takes longer, and, with a hitchhiker at night, it just doesn't add up that he would want to take this route. The man asked my friend why he wasn't afraid of killing him. My friend, already feeling nervous, is now totally freaking out. In an attempt to seem as calm as possible, he replies, "Well, I don't know you, so how would I know if you wanted to kill me?" Trying to sound indifferent to the idea. The man then begins heading up an old logger road. At this point, my friend is losing it. He is thinking about all of the possible scenarios and how he can get away. He had a pocket knife and considered stabbing him, but the guy was so large, he figured it would barely bother him. Knowing he likely didn't have long to make a move, clutching his backpack, he opens the door and jumps out of the moving van. He begins running down through the forest in the night and could barely see anything in front of him. He continued to run downward, back towards the main road, through the trees. By this time, the man had stopped the van, hopped out, and began screaming for him to come back. My friend continued to run down until he felt he was far enough away that there was no way the man would come after him. He crouched down behind a tree and watched as the man got back into the van and continued to shine his headlights through the trees, hoping to spot him. Thankfully, he was down far enough that the light wasn't shining that far. He stayed there until daybreak and then went back down the main road to continue hitching home. This story has always stuck with me as one of the scariest. I wonder if that man had ever harmed anyone else or attempted to? I'm so thankful he made it out unharmed, and so glad he risked jumping out of the vehicle. When I was about 11 and it was around November or December, I was finished eating and went over to the sink to put my plate back. It was around 9:45 to 9:50 p.m., so it was pitch black at that time, and I was getting ready to go to bed. I looked through the window and saw this black figure. I couldn't see his face, but I can tell he was a man. He was walking across my backyard with his hands raised in a claw shape. Me being 11 years old was creeped out and ran upstairs. I was already afraid of the dark, but my fear grew after this day. I can never go to my backyard when it's dark, just because of this day. So this is gonna sound like bullshit, and I'm not entirely sure I can trust my memory of it, but here we go. I used to work at the youth detention center in the high-risk unit. There were stories about one of the other intake units being haunted, but just things like stuff falling off shelves or moving in the offices. We had one fella in who had been sung, pointing the bone, by an elder in his community. He was also schizophrenic and had a list of other psychological issues, which caused him to tape newspaper and toilet paper to his mirrors, windows, and anything reflective as his own reflection could set him off. His brain was so fried from drugs and or mental disorders that he couldn't really talk above a whisper and would pretty much only say one word at a time. I won't say what he had done, for obvious reasons. I never believed in the spiritual side, and honestly, I still don't, but I had just come back from my rounds and was sitting in the office by myself, and the camera in his room detected some movement. I looked at the screen, and I don't really know how to describe it, but it looked like his shadow standing over his bed, only he was currently sleeping in his bed. Keep in mind, this was also the night vision camera, as it was pitch black in his room, so I shouldn't have been able to see any shadows in the first place. Saying it looked like a shadow is probably incorrect anyway, more just like a hazy thing? I dunno. Anyway, I grabbed my flashlight and went back to his room and shone it in there, and I just felt this weird energy that terrified me. Again, it was difficult to explain, but I saw what looked like a void standing next to his bed. Not a black void, just like nothing. It's like no color at all. I tapped his porthole to try to get him to stir, but he was pretty deep, and I was terrified for him, so I put the light on the strobe and just yelled, "Oi, get out." This was at probably 2 or 3 a.m., so of course it woke up everyone in the unit, and they turned their lights on and told me to shut the duck up and duck off, etc. But he woke up with this terrified look in his eyes, like he knew what I was doing. I called my supervisor to come down so I could explain what was happening, as I didn't want to announce it over the radio, and I kind of just wanted to take him out of the room for a while. Supervisor thought I was full of shit, but it wasn't the first time he had heard a similar story, so he let me move him to a different room for the night, and I got him some hot Milo and a couple of snacks. Anyway, I still think it could have been the 2 a.m. overtime jitters, and I don't buy into spirits, but I'll never discount someone's beliefs, or more importantly, their fears, ever again. When I was a kid, we'd go to these beach cabins in Maryland, right by the Chesapeake. They were small, rustic ordeals with basic comforts, nothing fancy like TVs or air conditioning. 2 bedrooms and a cot in the kitchen, and my siblings and I rotated on the cot so that no one got too sore from it. A small tradition was that my mom and I would have a hot cup of tea before bed in our summer jammies, just our way of relaxing while everyone else went off to read or listen to music. Well, one night I was settling on the cot when she picked up the tea kettle to fill it. Out of the corner of my eye, I see her flinch, then say in a steady voice, "What are you doing there?" My head whipped over to the kitchenette to see her looking out the window. Then she jumped back and started screaming for my father. Somehow he knew shit was getting real, ran from the back bedroom, and barely paused to see my mom point towards the left side of the house. He burst out the door and towards the left of the cabin. I'll be the first to admit I ran like a mother ducker and baseball slid under my parents' bed, because damn it, I was 10, and that's what kids do when they're terrified. I still remember the smell of the old wood and the feel of my teddy bear shielding me from whatever the hell was happening. I remember seeing my 14-year-old brother, then a medium-ranking karate student, following my dad out of the cabin at full speed. The rest of the story is an amalgamation of what I heard and what my family filled in for me. My father, a former Army sergeant and MP with a Bronze Star, managed to tackle the guy that had been peeping into our kitchen window. He put him in an elbow lock face down on the ground, my brother standing sentinel over both of them while my mom ran to get the cell phone we'd bought just 2 weeks earlier. This was in '95 when those suckers had cords and everything. While my mom called 911, I remember hearing the guy talking. He was saying things like, "The Ouija board ducking told me. I want the devil to suck my ducking brains out. Satan is in cabin 10, I have to get to cabin 10. The devil wants me to end myself." And so on. We were in cabin 3, over half a mile from where he apparently intended to meet the devil. My dad kept a grip on him for probably a good 15 minutes until the cops showed up. The first thing that came out of his mouth was, "Jamie, when they let you out?" He'd been released from jail just 2 weeks earlier for arson. You know where he was standing when my mom was at the sink in the kitchen? Right beside the propane tank. When I was around 15 years old, I, along with a group of about 7 people, ventured into the supposedly haunted woods in our area, known as Okefenokee. There are various stories about these woods, the main ones being that 7 corpses had been found in the woods and were never identified, totally factual. Parts of the woods were used as Indian burial grounds or battlegrounds in the past, possibly true, look up Mississiniwa 1812. And that a little girl named Stephanie who was sacrificed by some cult in the 1800s haunts the woods, and you can sometimes hear her scream, doubtful. The douche of the group swore he knew the trails of the woods like the back of his hand, which turned out he didn't. We got lost for about 3 hours wandering these woods until we wound up exiting on the opposite side. These woods are dense and dark as hell, and being the geniuses we were, only one flashlight was brought along for the whole group to share, which was conveniently in our tour guide's hands at the front of the line the whole time, leaving the rest of us to follow behind in darkness. I was at the back of the line, right behind my girlfriend at the time, because she didn't want to be last. After about an hour of wandering these trails aimlessly, I saw what I figured to be a fresh yellow glow stick on the ground about 10 feet off to the side of the trail. I didn't think anything of it. A few minutes later, I see another, but it's up in a tree and is a different color. Then another, and another, way up in trees and in just odd places. They gradually started increasing in number and variety of colors to the point that they were everywhere, and I finally realized that these were not glow sticks when some were seeming suspended in mid-ducking air. At first they were only stationary, and then some were literally flying through the air, weaving through trees, slow and fast. At the first sight of these, I began to wonder if the darkness was beginning to make me hallucinate. I asked, "Am I the only one seeing this?" To which my girlfriend replied, "No, but let's please not talk about it." Everyone seemed very tense and intimidated, but I followed behind the group in disbelief, just observing and admiring whatever the hell it was that we were seeing. These baseball-ish sized orbs had energy that I felt, like personalities. Some felt bright and joyful, and sometimes it seemed like they were dancing. Others seemed shy and timid and tended to be dim and slow. One in particular was dark and stationary, like a black/purple color that really blew my mind, as if being surrounded by flying balls of light in the middle of the woods isn't mind-blowing enough, because it's pitch ducking black but I was looking at a dark light? And it felt ominous. I didn't feel comfortable walking past that one. But regardless, they were beautiful. They were around for no longer than a half hour and gradually disappeared in the same way they appeared, shortly before we stumbled out of the woods and right into some guy's property in the middle of the night. He was kind enough to tell us where we were and called the sheriff to give our friend a ride back to his van so he could come back and get us. No idea what it was that we saw. I obviously did a ton of searches on the internet and never found any reports similar to what we experienced anywhere. I've been back numerous times in hopes of seeing them again and never have. It's something I'll never forget, and unfortunately I have learned that I will rarely be able to share with anyone without being looked at like I'm insane. So I was at my dad's house, chilling in bed. It was around 12 a.m., and I was starting to get tired. I went downstairs to get some water, and I felt like something was watching me. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. Scared as duck, I quickly chugged my water and ran upstairs. I was hoping it would be the end of it, but it wasn't. A couple minutes later, after I was starting to fall asleep, I heard footsteps. I knew all of my family was asleep. The footsteps were getting louder and louder and got close to my room. At this point, I was petrified, so I just grabbed my blanket and put it over my head. A couple minutes later, I had one of the scariest experiences I've ever had, paranormal-wise. I felt a finger touch my head and go all the way to my back. The finger was cold and felt old. A minute later, I quickly felt a presence leave, and I felt safe again. Everyone at my dad's house believes that it's haunted. We've all seen crazy things and heard unexplained knocking and doors opening. The presence itself feels not violent but very territorial. Whenever I go downstairs, especially at night, I feel like I should not be there. But upstairs I'm fine. And during the daylight, I'm usually fine. I don't think the spirit is violent, but it definitely is territorial and wants its own space. Even when it touched me, I had this weird feeling it wasn't violent. But I don't know. What do you guys think of this? This is about 4.5 years ago, and I was 19 at the time. I'm driving back from the gym one night at around 1 a.m., and it's decently foggy. I pass by a crosswalk for our local trail called Iron Horse Trail that has sensors that light up if someone is going to cross. They go off right as I pass it. I look back in my rear view, and there's a person standing right there in the middle of the crosswalk. He's not even 10 feet behind the car, and it would have been impossible for him to be there with me having just driven through. I ducking punch it. I get to a stop sign about 100 yards away. I inhaled deeply and glanced back. The same person is now under a sidewalk stoplight, not even 15 feet behind me. I floored it again. I'm freaked out. I drive. I just drive. I run a stop sign and keep going. I'm way past the turn for my house, and I'm at least 5 turns off. I just stop at the next stop sign to backtrack and turn right. I ducking lose my breath because mid-turn I see him. In the middle of an unlit street with his back turned to me. I just feel thousands of shivers go down my spine and hold the gas down. I blow right past him or what I thought was him. I keep going down this long stretch, and I look back. He's just standing there. I stop. I look at this outline, just stand there, and suddenly I blink, and he's gone. I don't even have a second, and I feel something land on my roof with a metallic clang while the car violently shakes. I gas it. I see a person roll off of my roof and off my bumper. I just drive and drive for half an hour and hurry home when I calm down. I finally fall asleep in my bed. I was still living with my parents, and wake up the next morning to my mom saying, "Matt, Were you racing around last night? I heard your car a few blocks away. Why does the roof look like something fell on it? I'm groggy, but I wake up thinking it was a terrible dream. I go into the garage with her and look at the roof. It's got marks on it, like something landed on it. Light dings and small dents like hail. I look at my rear window and see a very clear handprint on it and a boot scuff on my rear bumper with finger marks trailing by the bottom of it on the accumulated dust. I found myself at a loss for words. I didn't tell a ducking soul. I still get shivers thinking about it and couldn't drive that way for a week. I want to preface this by saying that this experience was many phones and an outdated security system ago. I still kick myself to this day for not having saved the video effectively during those changes, but knowing it existed makes this one of my favorite validating paranormal experiences to share because I know I'm not crazy. About 4 years ago, we had a dark mist enter our home while I was at work. I got a ping from our backyard security camera, and the video showed a legit, somewhat transparent dark mist moving across the roof and corner of our garage, back patio, and towards our back door before disappearing through the wall on the left edge of the screen. I initially thought that it was a cloud shadow, but it was far too small and didn't align with how I knew the sun to hit back there, so I assumed it was a thin and out of focus bug crossing the lens and didn't think much more of it. My mother-in-law was home watching our son, who was roughly a year old at the time. About 20 minutes after seeing the video, curiosity got the best of me, and I switched to the other cameras running live in the house and caught my mill in the middle of smudging the kitchen. She had been known to do those things occasionally, so I wasn't alarmed. Immediately upon getting home and entering the house, she started telling me about how she and my son were in the living room recliner relaxing, him laying belly against her, when he suddenly picked his head up to look into the bedroom. The recliner sat next to the open doorway, and he started crying hysterically. She sat up, turned around, and swore she saw a 6-foot-tall, dark mass of a person with its hand on the doorframe, peeking around the doorway at her and our son. She stood up, cradled our son tightly against her, and shouted, "You are scaring my grandchild, and you are not welcome here. In the name of Jesus Christ, be gone." The shadow evaporated shortly after. Once she got out and calmed down, she started smudging the whole house. I asked her what time all of this happened, and she told me, the exact time of the video I had of what I thought was a bug. I immediately showed her the video, and we both shared a look of astonishment. It was far too coincidental. She had no way of knowing about the video, and we hadn't spoken before then. It still gives me chills to think that we had proof in that moment. I often wonder what drew the spirit to our home because it was clearly outside before entering through the back door and bedroom. Why was it being so sneaky and peeking around the door at our son? So strange. I live in Virginia, a pretty rural area. My house is a townhome in a neighborhood right next to a middle school. I've lived in this house for over 10 years and frequently went on walks during the daytime all around the neighborhood itself plus the surrounding buildings and woods, but I've never gone on a walk at night here. After starting college, I got very accustomed to taking walks around my campus at night when the weather's nice, so now that I'm home for winter break and Virginia is in one of its weirdly warm winter weeks, I decided I may as well go on a walk at night here, since it's a safe area and night walks are almost daily routines for me now. So, I leave my house at around midnight, not very late. I walk over to the middle school and I sit down on the track. The track is a concrete oval going around the soccer field. I'm just sitting there, relaxing, listening to music with one earbud in. I also had a lit candle on the ground a foot in front of me, which sounds kind of weird of me to have now that I type it out. Lighting candles while I sit and chill somewhere outside is just a habit I developed from having a ton of candles and being unable to light them in my room at college. I hear what sounded like a cough, so I instantly stop my music and start looking around. I don't see anything, but I'm an extremely paranoid person, so I'm still very on edge, even though everything seems fine. I just sit there doing nothing for maybe 1 or 2 minutes, and I start settling back down, thinking maybe the cough was just leaves in the nearby woods between my neighborhood and this soccer field. So I'm almost fully relaxed, but then I head the cough again. Then I see something sprint on its back legs across the field faster than I've ever seen anything move before, and it gets to the other end of the field and then continues to stand there on its hind legs. I couldn't see it super well because it was dark and far away. Since I had just heard coughing and it was running on 2 legs, I initially thought it was a person, but when it was standing still, I could see that it was too large and weirdly proportioned to be human. It was also screeching the whole time. Like an incredibly loud horror movie creature screeching that made my ears ring. It looked like its back was to me, so I took the opportunity to pack up and sprint home. I'm physically disabled, and I can move around just fine, but never very quickly. I literally cannot think of another time in my life where I ran that fast. The only sort of paranormal thing I believe in is plain old ghosts, so as soon as I got home, I texted all my friends about it and Googled all I could. Everyone I texted reassured me it was probably just injured or diseased, since that can make deer act weird like that. So that's a little reassuring, but at the same time, I'm Googling about deer running on their hind legs and screeching their heads off, and while it's a decently documented occurrence, none of the pictures and videos on any website are anywhere near what I saw. 2 additional details. 1, based on its size, I just assumed it was a deer. It didn't have antlers or anything else. I couldn't really tell what it was, and I'm mainly going with deer because I'm very skeptical about paranormal topics and don't want to assume it was anything other than a deer. 2, I've read descriptions of deer running on their hind legs, and I've watched videos of them. None of the videos I've seen really match up with just how strangely swiftly this thing was moving. Like, it was basically a blur running past me. I wanted to share this. Maybe someone who knows Appalachian animals better than I do can reassure me that it was just a sick deer or something. Happy spooky Halloween month. My auntie lived in an old pub with a lot of history that dated back to the 18th century. Rumors of murders there were rife, and I believe it had been used as a brothel and as a gallows. Despite the above, I never found it particularly spooky and would happily stay for the majority of the summer holidays and help to look after my younger cousins. Several summers went by without any kind of experience, and I would often stay up late to help my auntie before heading to bed at about 1 a.m. However, one night I had just gotten into bed and felt the bedroom go extremely cold. It's the middle of August, and it's been a warm summer night. I immediately sit up in bed and start to check the window for a breeze, but as I turn towards it, I get an overwhelming sensation that I am being watched. I also start to see movement from the corner of my eye. Now I shared a room with my little cousin, so not too alarmed, but as I turn around, I notice something that I cannot explain to this day. By the foot of my bed, there are 3 figure-like shapes, but they were made up of lights, almost like golden orbs, and were different heights and sizes. I was initially curious rather than scared and thought it was a light source from outside. I decided to move the curtains around, but they remained in the same position and stayed there until I put the light on. Once I switched the lights off again, they didn't appear, and the room became warm again. At the time I put it down to tiredness, but they appeared every single night of my stay and were always at the end of my bed. I even asked my cousin to swap beds, not saying the real reason why, and they still appeared in the same location. Now I am usually scared by paranormal stuff, but I never ever felt scared or threatened by whatever it was in the room, and they only seemed to appear at night at around 1 a.m. I never said anything to anyone as I didn't want to scare my cousin, and I never spoke about it for several years. Eventually my auntie moved out to a new part of town, and I never went back to the pub. The story should end here, but curiosity got the better of me. I asked my cousin if she ever experienced anything in her old home, and she started to describe the 3 guardian angels that watched over her at night. I asked her to describe them, and they matched what I saw, always at the foot of her bed. Well, actually, I'm not a big believer in paranormal stuff. I mean, I like stories and horror movies, and even I had very unnatural things that happened to me, but I always like to say that it's just a coincidence. But I have one story that I still can't explain, and that's the only one I can't get over myself with even after 10 years. So when I was in high school, our class went on a trip for a week to Italy. We had rooms for 3, so of course I shared a room with my best friend and one other girl, who never bothered us. Actually, she was never in the room. Because of that, we always locked the door for nights, so nobody could walk in. Every night we had a great time, we slept to loud music, enjoying that we were alone, and never talked about anything paranormal. We had pretty good vibes for most of the nights. Except one night, when we felt exhausted, and I can't even remember how, we fell asleep fast, before midnight. The bed was pretty big, so we slept together, but we couldn't even reach each other, and I slept on the left side of it, facing the wall. When I suddenly woke up in the middle of the night, I was in the same position and felt confused about what happened. It was strange because all the lights were out and the room was silent, but I thought my friend just turned everything off when I fell asleep. As I lay there, I tried to move, but I realized that I was paralyzed, and it felt like someone's watching me in the dark from the middle of the room. Sat on her side of the bed, and called my name, so I told her I'm awake. And she told me that she felt like someone was watching her when she woke up and felt so scared, but she had to go to the toilet very badly. We had the same experience. Chills went down on my spine, and I told her I felt the same thing, and we were scared to go back to sleep. Since then, like I said, little things happened, like hearing stuff, and we even put some cameras in our dorm room like real investigators, but these weren't as bad as the first event. Also, I had the video on my phone, and we watched back one time because it just vanished from my phone after a couple of days. But maybe I had a virus or something, I don't think it's a big deal. My friend told me that one time when she was at the dorm room alone, she was awake and felt the same watching from the other side of the room, from the dark, but I wasn't there, so we don't know if that was the same stuff again. Sometimes we still talk about it. We tried to debunk it, but we couldn't. So if you have any idea what kind of thing was that or why we felt the same, or even if you had a similar story, I really would like to know. My sister and I were reminiscing on our favorite childhood memories when I decided to tell her about the creatures I used to think I saw behind our old house. She told me she saw the same exact things. Both of our stories lined up so perfectly that it actually freaked us out, and we had to stop talking about it. Several years ago, we were in northwestern Oregon. We've since moved states. We lived in St. Helens, in a house with a huge wooded area behind it. We always played and explored back there. When I was back there, sometimes I would see movement in the corner of my vision. Whenever I would look over to see what it was, I would see one of these things. I never really saw them at the same time. The first one was tall, dark, and super lanky. It walked on all fours and looked sickly. When I turned to look at it, it would freeze in place, then just bolt further into the forest. It looked leathery, with only a little bit of hair on its legs and neck. It always looked like it had big ears or antlers, but I could never tell for sure. I never saw its face. When it stood still, it had a solid shape. Whenever it bolted, it was like it lost its shape, and the edges of it were constantly shifting. The second one scared me more. It had the same lanky legs and walked on all fours, but the body was disproportionately larger than the legs. It also looked like it had more hair than the other one. I would always see it just before or after the first one I described. It also had the same either weird ears or antlers, but it was always standing somewhere dark, unlike the first one, which always seemed to not mind light as long as there were lots of trees. I never saw it move. It would just stand there when I saw it and disappear when I blink or look away. I also saw this one's face, and it had these huge, milky white eyes with no pupils. Sometimes I would catch it watching me from behind/between trees. They both were about the size of a large horse or something. We could also hear branches snap whenever the smaller one bolted. The first few times I saw them, I was scared shitless. Before I saw the first one, I'd always just feel a little anxiety and like I was being watched. Before I saw the second one, I'd feel the same way, but would also get a strong sense of dread to go along with it. After a while, as I got more accustomed to seeing them, I'd whisper greetings to them. They'd stick around a few seconds longer than usual whenever I did, like they could hear my whispers. Eventually, I felt more comfortable with them being there. I didn't feel the dread or fear after a few years of seeing them. Something told me to not try and get close, but as long as I respected our distance, I almost felt safer knowing they were there. I even saw the large one, because of its eyes, in the forest outside my bedroom window one night when it was raining. I told my sister all of this, and she started freaking out, saying she thought they were like weird imaginary friends. If I had to describe something that vaguely resembled them, I'd say like a cross between a deer, a bear, large one, or sickly wolf, small one, and a man. Like a Wendigo, almost, but not quite the same. They never seemed evil either, they just scared me at first. They might have just been some ducked up animals, but that doesn't feel right to me for some reason. I grew up dirt poor in western South Dakota. The county I lived in was larger than Delaware, with a population of about 30,000 people. When I was bored, which was frequently, I'd go to the library in town, population 530. I'd pick a random book and start reading. One of the books I read was a history of the area, and one of the stories dealt with my stepfather's father, step-grandpa. Property, in that his father, step-great-grandpa, had annexed some property in the 30s, during the Dust Bowl. My grandmother was kind of well off but easily the most evil person I've ever met. A week or two later, I asked her about my late step-great-grandfather's annexation. The Millers was how she answered. No other explanation. It took me asking aunts and uncles, but the story went that during one of the particularly horrid dust storms, a family called the Millers had abandoned their property, just left the place, and went to greener pastures in California. I asked around to where the property used to be, and they mentioned it was on the southeast side of the property, by some mini badlands areas we called breaks. When I asked if the house and everything were still there, they said no and that it was a waste of time. I was a curious little shit though, and my favorite topics were history and archaeology. So one afternoon, I went to where I thought they were talking about, a bit of a rise in the middle of otherwise completely uninteresting plains. Nothing. A couple of more weeks went by. I was probably 11 or 12, I forget. I went on a ride down that way again, dirt bike, not horse, and found myself in a sort of V between some breaks. I saw what I thought was a weird pyramid of some sort and went to check it out. What it ended up being was the angle of a roof sticking out of the ground. I went around the far side and saw an attic vent. Because I was more curious than cautious, I pulled the framing around the vent and opened it. There was a bunch of blown dirt around, but otherwise the area was mostly intact. Not much in it, but it was an unfinished attic with one of those old school ladders halfway down and a couple of holes going down to the rooms underneath. I glanced into one. When my eyes adjusted to the light, I'm fairly sure I saw something lying on the floor. I can't tell you what it was because I was out of there so ducking fast I outran photons. I rode back to Grandma's house, but there was no way on the planet I was telling that woman I went to the place, so I waited for a week and told my cousin Brad. Brad was is slightly more intelligent than a piece of driftwood. He called it bullshit and wanted to see for himself. I was having none of this, but told him I'd take him there anyway, as I wasn't chicken. We got to where I ducking well no I was, but there wasn't a house, there wasn't a roof. There were dirt bike tracks, there were footprints, but it looked like I just walked around for a while in the alkali dirt. Brad gave me shit about it, went down, and told my other cousins that I'd bullshitted him, blah blah blah. Even a couple of my aunts found out and gave me shit. I swear that shit happened. There's been a whole lot of my life that I've added a few adjectives/adverbs to make more interesting, but, bullshit aside, that happened just the way I've typed it. Still ducks with me to this day. When I was very young, maybe 5 years old, I was sitting on my grandmother's back porch, sharing peanut butter Caro crackers with my ma, and watching the sunset. My baby sister had been down for a late nap and woke up crying, so my grandmother went to tend to her, leaving me alone on the deck, just surveying the horizon and snacking. While she was gone, I watched a deeply tanned man slowly ride a dapple gray down the dirt road alleyway. He rode bareback, his legs clad in buckskin with beating down the side and his feet in moccasins that were glossy black from wear on the bottom. He was further adorned with some kind of breastplate, no shirt, and a very long, feathered headdress that swayed around the horse's haunches with each step. As he very slowly sauntered down the alley and approached Ma's backyard, I could see his face better. He looked forward in this firm and resolute sort of way that unnerved me. The way he carried himself telegraphed a sense that he was comfortable and unafraid, but tightly wound. He felt dangerous. He faced forward until he passed directly in front of me. He turned his head, looked straight at me for an incredibly long moment, and pointed at me angrily with his left hand while raising a tomahawk with his right. He stopped short, right in front of me, and turned the horse in tight circles. He never took his eyes off me, turning his head towards me with every circle of his mare. He yelled at me in words I did not understand, pumping his little axe in the air to punctuate his angry language. He stared me down, gesticulated at me again, and said something I believe was along the lines of "You don't belong here. Leave." He let out a series of war whoops, kicked his heels into the horse's flanks, and rapidly loped away. I ran into the house, crying about crazy feathers scaring me. Ma calmed me down and said I must have fallen asleep and dreamed it. There were no hoof prints in the alley, nobody else heard his very loud admonition. I was dismissed as a teller of tall tales. But this really happened, and it just made no freaking sense. What was he doing there? There were no reservations nearby and no significant Native American population in that tiny community. Why did he not speak to me in English? I mean, why obscure your warning with a language nobody else knows? Why were there no tracks? A horse that is agitated comes down hard and should leave a mark. However, we couldn't find any traces. Nobody believed me at the time, and adult me can't blame them, but I know what I saw. I always had encounters my whole life, I got used to them growing up. But one encounter I had, ongoing for months, left me shaken and scared, and I'll never mess with antique furniture again. A little background, back in 2010, I started refurbishing antique furniture. I made a killing off of it, and I loved a great find. Fast forward to 2015. I had my ex-husband drive about 1.5 hours to pick up two very old vanities I found online. I purchased both vanities for just $100, which was a great deal. Right? Yes. Until no. I typically get right on my projects and finish them within 24 to 72 hours, depending on how much TLC my pieces need. Well, for some odd reason, I just flat out didn't feel like working on my two new gorgeous finds. I just wanted them to sit there. They were already perfectly flawed. As days turned into weeks, I started getting really irritable, angry, short-tempered, all of the above. Depressed. I stopped playing with my daughter, I began getting late to work, I was just a complete mess. My ex never said a word to me about my ill behavior. Then my daughter, being almost 3 at the time, started talking about the white lady who would stand in the corner of her room and stare at her, sometimes would sit on her bed. I did notice her room felt heavy in there. But I just brushed it off, her imagination leaking into mine. Then, one night my ex and I heard my daughter run across the house to get to our room, cross space under the floor, we hear all footsteps. But as our daughter got to our door, she couldn't open it. So, my ex decided to get up to open the door for her. Well, as he opened the door, we then heard her door slam at the same time, and we saw her door hanger knocking against her door. So we decided to go check on her. This is where things get chilling. She was sound asleep in her bed. And what gave it away that she never got up is that she was still tucked in. She always sleeps with a pillow on top of her, under the blankets, for extra comfort. It was all still in perfect placement. No way a 2-year-old placed a body pillow back on top of her and tucked her blanket around herself so neatly. Moving on, strange things start happening, cabinets left open, doors open, water dripping, etc. Classic paranormal movie type stuff. My moods just got worse and worse as now months have gone by. Then one night, I was home alone, my parents had my daughter, and my ex-husband was with his study group, college at the time. And I had to get up and go pee. Okay, I walked to my bathroom. I tried to turn on the light. It wouldn't come on. Okay, breaker blown? Sure. Breaker is in my daughter's closet. So as I walk out of the bathroom and head to my master door, which leads to the living room, a major force hits me, and I can't make this up. I blacked out. I don't know how long I was out, but when I woke up, my throat was sore and bruised. Every light, fan, appliance, TV, static, water faucets were on, all my cabinets were opened, everything. And I was so scared, I started crying. And the next day we decided to get rid of those vanities. After that, nothing happened again, and my daughter stopped talking about the white lady. She still remembers her to this day, though. And there's much more that happened in those months, but nothing that compared to that night. I don't ever want to experience anything like that again. So no more antique furniture for me. I lived a real-life haunting, and it took a huge toll on my mental health. This happened to me when I was around 6 years old in the mid-90s. My father was a Finnish carpenter at the time, and I went to work with him one day. He was working on restoring an old hotel called the Feather River Inn in Plumas County, CA. The inn was built in 1915 and was also a preparatory school. It has now been vacant for a long time. At the time, I knew the inn had a history of being haunted, or at least very spooky. My dad had told me about the place and about stories he had heard. He later had his own story. I was little at the time and didn't really think too much about it, but I remember I was excited to go and see it in person. The 3rd floor was abandoned and was in really bad repair. I remember it being really dark and in shambles, think any kind of old abandoned building look. We went to the 3rd floor to look around because there were really weird paintings in some of the rooms. They were painted in all black and white swirls, like hypnosis circles. The crew imagined that boys from the prep school probably drew them, but no one knew for sure. The strangest thing is that they even found mummified cats in one of the walls up there. The 2nd floor was where they were working that day. As we walked there, we noticed colonies of bat balls on the ceilings. They were literal balls of bats, all clinging together. The place was very eerie. So, I remember the 2nd floor was shaped like a big square with one hallway around the perimeter. The halls were very long. The part of the hall they were working in was in good shape and lit. There were other guys working all down this part, busy doing things. I was standing at one end, looking all the way down the hall. I realized someone was peeking around the corner at the other end of the hall. It was a woman. You can tell I was little at the time because I just assumed it was the wife of one of my dad's crew members. She had long black curly hair, fair skin, dark eye makeup, and dark clothes. She really resembled this man's wife, so I excitedly started to wave at her. But she did wave back. This went on for a while, and I felt really confused. I started to feel strange because no one else in the hall was reacting. She was just deadpan staring at me, so I reflexively turned to look behind myself. Maybe she was looking past me. When I turned back, she was gone. I thought this was weird, so I walked down the hall and turned the corner. When I looked down this part of the hall, it was totally black and all a mess. They hadn't even started working on this part yet. That's when I got pretty scared because it all sank in at once. I realized the position that the woman was standing in was not normal. You could not see her lower half at all from around the corner. It was like just her upper half was sticking out from around the side. At that point, I realized that her hair was not curly, It was like out of control. She wasn't fair-skinned, she was basically pure white. Her dark makeup was actually just two big vacant holes in her eyes. It's crazy looking back on this experience because it's like, what on earth was I thinking, waving at that? It is also strange that it took a while for me to process how creepy she looked. I can still totally see her and the whole experience in my mind's eye. I can't totally remember her expression, though. I think it was just blank or serious, no smiling. I can't remember what I did next, but I know I have talked about it with my parents in the past. Basically everyone who has spent time there has had a strange experience. Whatever I saw was so vivid in there that I interacted with it. Any thoughts or ideas? I was at a campout with my youth group once, and we sat around a campfire, and some of the others told scary stories. I remember one, but I don't recall it word for word or the details. But I do remember the basic idea. I'll just make up the rest to fill in the blanks and make it good. Went something like this. A young boy was given the task of house sitting for a couple who were going away on their honeymoon. He had nothing better to do in his spare time, as it was summer, and he didn't have many friends to hang out with or things to do. Also, he could really use the extra cash, so he was more than pleased to accept this job. They gave him a list of all the chores that needed to be done each day. He assured them he would look after the place well. They thanked him and went on their merry way. He made sure all the chores were done that were on the list. Take out the trash, check. Sweep and vacuum, check. He went down the list, checking everything after he did them. There was one last thing he had to do, the laundry in the basement. The couple hadn't had time to do it all. He sighed and simply decided to get it over with. He never liked basements much. He was fortunate enough to have grown up in a house without one. He mentally prepared himself and walked down into the dusty, cold, dim room. He couldn't find a light, but there was a tiny bit of sunlight coming from the basement window, just enough for him to see his way around. He got to work on the laundry, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. After folding the dried clothes and switching the wet ones to the dryer, he carried the now clean and folded laundry with him on his way to the stairs. Then he noticed something. A mirror sits on the wall. He stopped for a second to take in its beauty. It was an antique mirror with artistic designs in the rusty metal frame. In the reflection, he could make out what appeared to be the silhouette of a little girl with a knife in her hand in the background. It scared him at first. Then he realized it might just be the way the stuff back there is stacked, the shape coming alive as a result of his imagination. He shrugged it off and continued upstairs to complete his task. He would do this every day for a week or so, and each time, he would glance in the mirror, and the silhouette of the girl stood behind him. Each time, however, he noticed it seemed as though each day, it was getting closer, and closer, and closer. He was kind of unnerved by this, but still just assumed it was a bunch of stuff. Perhaps it was his perception getting the better of him, his eyes playing tricks in the darkness. He decided to look behind him to check it out, but didn't see anything at all. Just the washer and the dryer, and some other items here or there, but nothing to make the shape that he saw in the mirror. Somewhat creeped out, he sped upstairs and closed the door behind him. After pondering on it for a few minutes, he decided he was just seeing things. Curse his overactive imagination. Finally, the last day arrived. The homeowners came back home, paying him for his service and thanking him for a job well done. He decided to ask them about the odd situation with the mirror. They looked at him, puzzled. They looked at each other, confused. What they said next sent chills down the boy's spine. We don't have a mirror in the basement. I generally consider myself a paranormal skeptic. I'm not religious, and I have a difficult time believing in ghosts. However, I like to entertain the idea. I enjoy ghost stories and movies, and I wouldn't rule out the paranormal as an explanation for a situation that otherwise lacks explanation. This story falls into the latter category. This took place almost 20 years ago when I was around 15. I'm from a small town in the Midwest filled with plenty of older houses. One weekend, my parents took me with them to an open house at a house across town. It was a massive 2-story farmhouse built in 1840. It was at the very back of its property, maybe 5 acres, and surrounded by mature trees and plants. The land had been somewhat decently maintained, but the house hadn't had anyone living in it for a while. It wasn't dilapidated inside or out, and it could certainly be lived in immediately, but it needed some TLC. Think the house from Ghosts, UK, but with more Berber carpet. The approach to the house was beautiful and had such a neat charm. We all really liked it. However, once we were in the house, I just felt strange. This was an open house, so there were probably 4 or 5 other groups of people touring throughout. Despite that, it just was so strangely quiet. We toured all around, starting with upstairs. There was such an odd vibe up there. I kept feeling kind of dizzy and claustrophobic, even though it was a big house. I was ready to leave after the weirdness upstairs and from seeing the amount of maintenance we'd have to do. But I was along for the ride, so we went down to the main level and looked all around. It felt a lot better down there, and I didn't get as uncomfortable as I did upstairs. Finally, the real estate agent started funneling everyone down to the basement. The door was in the kitchen. It led to the kind of basement you'd imagine a house built in 1840 would have, a bare bulb hanging by a thread above the stairs, completely unfinished walls, a dirt floor, and stairs that would be perfect to have your ankles grabbed from the other side. You know the ones. We all went down to the basement together and looked around a bit. Not much to see, except cobwebs and old wiring. It could have been the old horror movie basement influencing my opinion, but I felt super weird down there and was ready to leave. Once everyone had their fill of looking around, we headed back up the stairs to the kitchen. I ended up being the very last person in the group, which meant I was the last person up the stairs. Since the rest of the group was loitering around in the kitchen, we had to slow down on the stairs so everyone could pass by. I remember clear as day, I was standing on the third step from the top, waiting to step into the kitchen and finally get out of that damn basement. All of a sudden, my hair gets pulled from behind. I had / have short hair, and it felt like someone grabbed the hair right in the middle of my head and gave it a tug. My first thought was maybe I got my hair caught in something on the wall, so I looked all around for the offending object. The only thing that I could have gotten my hair stuck in was a wall-mounted fire extinguisher. But I know I was nowhere near it. I made a beeline out of there soon, followed by my parents. When we got in the car, I told them what happened. We've talked about this story every now and then throughout the years, mostly in a "wasn't that strange?" way. It remained my favorite ghost story to tell, especially since I don't have any other first-hand ones. The property was later sold to a local restaurateur, who sadly bulldozed a lot of the trees and front lawn to build a new Italian restaurant. The house remained intact at the back of the property, and still does to this day. Fast forward around 4 years. I had moved to college and largely forgot about the hair-pulling thing. My mom called me and said she had just had her mind blown and needed to share. She had gone to a hair appointment with her stylist, and the topic of the Italian restaurant and house came up. She told my mom that there's allegedly an older female spirit that likes to mess with people, especially men, on the steps leading to the basement. She said this without my mom having ever mentioned my experience to her. She had no idea I had my hair pulled 4 years earlier. Of course, my mom proceeded to share my story from the open house with her. I swear, chills went down my spine. In fact, I'm getting chills just typing this. The house is still standing, and the Italian restaurant is still open. Part of me wants to go back to the house, but a much more sensible part of me wants nothing to do with it. Trying not to dox myself, but I'll share the restaurant name via DM if anyone is interested. Thanks for listening, y'all. Happy spooky season. So, it's always been casually tossed about that my folks have a ghost. He's been with them since before my brother and I were born, moving with them from a trailer to my toddlerhood home to the home that I grew up in, and where my folks still reside after 30 plus years. They affectionately call him Trevor, transparent and clever, because my dad's punny like that, and he's not particularly scary per se. He's more of a "hey, I knew I left this over here, where is it?" or that just fell over for no reason type of guy. Sometimes there's years between occurrences. Long enough to almost forget about him, but then something happens to remind us he's still around. When I was a teenager, my friend was spending the night, as she often did, and we were up really late, like 2 to 3 a.m. My room was directly below my folks, so this late at night we weren't really talking, but we were sitting on my bed, right next to my window, writing in a notebook back and forth to stay quiet. The question of Trevor's validity came up, and we both agreed it was nonsense. Just then, like immediately, there was a huge, loud bang on the screen of my window. Our eyes got huge, we turned out the light, and we sat silently in the dark until we both eventually fell asleep. This house is in the middle of nowhere. It's a riverfront property on a private drive. At the time, my folks had rambunctious huskies outside that would bark and howl at any person that came on or near the property, even us. And they were silent. Literally just "he's not real" and bang, in succession, and silence. It did not sound like a bat or bird accidentally hit the screen. That's happened before, so we had context, and the timing was just so perfect that we were scared out of our wits. Have not discounted or dismissed Trevor since. He does still occasionally knock things over. I was home a couple months ago and saw a toy that wasn't even near the edge of a shelf fall to the ground, and I heard someone knocking on the bathroom door while I was in the shower, and no one was in the house. But that one time was the only time that seemed like we had prompted a response out of him, like he was insulted and we didn't believe he was there. I have many spooky stories, probably too many to tell, but I'll share some. My half-brother, from my previous marriage, when he was a young adult and was walking home one night, felt a strange sensation and looked around and saw a bright orange light hovering directly above him. He said it was completely silent and kept following him, slowly drifting overheard. He eventually walked faster until he was running the rest of the way home, where he told my mom what had happened. A story from when my mom was in her early 20s. I think she was living in PT. Augusta or somewhere near there out in the country. At a friend's party, I went out onto the front porch for a smoke. The sun was starting to go down, and in the sky she saw a bright orange orb in the sky. She said it started zipping across the sky, performing all kinds of maneuvers and patterns, sometimes disappearing before reappearing elsewhere. It went on for about 30 minutes before it vanished completely. For the record, this story would have been from around the early 60s. When I was a kid, I was always fascinated by the paranormal. I grew up in a haunted house, that's a story of its own for another time, and after watching the X-Files a lot from about age 12, I would always just sit outside and watch the sky to try and spot stuff. I did see one or two things, but they were pretty far away and not that spectacular. One day I was inside while my dad was out the back at night, probably smoking a cigarette, but I don't really remember. My dad yelled, "Strickens, come quick. There's a UFO." And at first I thought Dad was taking the piss and it was going to be something stupid like just a plane, but when I got out there and looked up, holy shit, this triangular-shaped low-flying object with bright lights at each corner on its base was just slowly moving over us, heading east. I think. We both literally just stared at this thing for who even knows how long. And then I honestly don't know what happened. I have no memory of that encounter after the initial sighting and us watching it float above us for a good 15 to 20 seconds. It was almost like the memory about it disappeared for a while and everything just went back to normal, which was weird for me because my supernaturally obsessed ass would have been ecstatic over it. Then randomly years later, I asked my dad, "Hey, do you remember this? It did happen, right?" To which my dad almost looked shocked for a minute before saying, "Yes. I do remember that. That was so weird, I can't believe I forgot about that for so long." We did chat about it for a while, and cross-confirmed our memories, but we're still a little confused why the memory of what happened after the sighting just doesn't seem to be there. My guess is just some kind of time slip or memory wipe, but honestly, who's to say at this point? So, I take my dad's ashes up to Glacier National Park every year. I lived in Colorado when this story happened, and I was headed south through Idaho after I had visited Montana. My car broke down in Salmon, Idaho, and a nice man helped me out. I was headed through the mountains to Boise to visit a friend. It was about a 5-hour drive. Before I entered the truly mountainous section of Idaho, I saw a hot spring on the side of this 2-lane highway along the Salmon River. I decided to take a dip after the stress of having my car break down. The hot spring had a bathhouse up at the top near the road and a wheelchair ramp that went down to the area near the springs, where they were on the side of the river. People had created little bath-shaped sections in the river that were separated by river stones. Actually, you could sit in a spot that was shaped like a hot tub so that it held the water from the hot springs while the river rushed over it. I got out of my car and headed down to the hot spring. I took my dog with me. It was twilight. About every half an hour, a car passed by. Knowing that I was alone, I essentially took off my top. I was sitting in the hot spring and actually photographed a car approaching. The car pulled up next to mine, in front of the bathhouse. It was a truck with 3 men inside. Seamlessly, 1 man got out of the driver's side, and 2 men got out of the passenger side. They moved without qualms and were covered in heavy black gear. They looked like hunters. I couldn't see the expressions on their faces. The driver headed down the wheelchair ramp towards me, not hesitating. He took big, long strides. I recognized that there was danger. The 2 passengers from the other side of the car headed down the steep bank along the wheelchair ramp, taking a shortcut. I was stuck in between both parties. Hastening, I hid and dressed myself underwater while my dog growled. He never growls. I've only heard him growl all of twice in my life, and this was the second time. The driver kept on walking towards me. He walked out onto the rocks into the river, continuously walking towards me even though he was covered in heavy gear that could get him waterlogged if he fell in the river. The other 2 passengers from the side of the car were also walking out on the rocks, directly in front of me. The driver got so close that I had to grab my dog before he lashed out at the driver. I was freaking out. The man was walking out onto the stones so that he could reach me. He was not hesitating. I couldn't see his face. I grabbed my phone, my keys, and my clothes. I dragged my dog in between the 2 parties, my heart in my ears. The driver would not stop. He turned around very quickly, making an arc, coming for me still. He was still taking big strides. The passengers were walking towards me as well. I was trapped in between them. I ran up the bank, dragging my dog pretty much by his collar all the way into my car. The only way that I could get into my car without them grabbing me was by throwing my dog into the back and lunging myself into the passenger side door of my car. I threw my keys into the ignition and turned them right when the men were walking up between my car and their car. I happened to hit the lock button on the door right when they walked up. Before anything else happened, or before I saw their faces, I ended up throwing myself into the driver's seat, reversing my car, and hightailing it out of there. I drove about 20 minutes down the road. I crossed the river on a bridge and hid my car behind a bank near other campers. It was well hidden from the main road. The campers were looking at me, wondering what was going on. I sat down and waited. Another 10 minutes passed by, and lo and behold, the truck drove by. The hunters were looking for me. I managed to wait another half an hour and then drove up to the mountains, over to Boise, and into safety. So this happened around 12 years ago, I guess, something like this. I went to my friend's house. It was his brother's birthday, and although I was invited, I was not that close to his brother. He was that kind of guy that likes parties and drinks a lot, and I'm more of the kind who enjoys calm places and some lemon juice. So after almost half an hour rubbing his dog's belly, I got pretty tired and went inside to meet my friend, and we started talking. My friend was playing Grand Chase while we chatted, and he asked my help to do something in the game, so I stood on foot behind the chair he was sitting. My arms would go over him, I had my head over his head, and that's when all started. From the corner of my eye, right in front of me, I don't know, around 7 meters from where I was, there was this black figure standing right in the kitchen door. It looked pretty much like a Dementor from Harry Potter, but it was not flying. Just wearing very long pieces of cloth, all stripped out. It was dark gray, one piece over the other. It was like there were many layers of cloth that would go all the way down to the ground. I couldn't see his face. It was also covered in gray clothing, and all I could spot was the mark of his nose under all that clothing. It was completely motionless, staring directly at us. It was not the first time this happened to me. I was getting pretty used to seeing weird things, but this was so clear and so terrifying that I got quite scared. But I was strong enough to think, okay, every time this happens and I look directly at the figure, it disappears, so I will continue playing this game and talking to my friend, pretending nothing is happening, and I'll see what happens next. And that's what I did. I kept playing the game, talking to my friend, and this figure was still there. Motionless. It was bothering me, and I thought, well, you know what? I'm looking at it. Fuck it. I'm tired of seeing it from the corner of my eye and nothing happening. I want to get out of this loop. So that's it. I raised my head and looked directly at that figure's face. Instantly, when I did that, my vision went completely blank. It's like all of my senses were shut down. I stopped hearing everything around me, I stopped feeling my body, I couldn't speak, I lost my sight, and my knees bent. It was like I lost any strength I had in my legs, and I almost fell to the ground. I held my friend's chair and hit my back at the balcony behind us. I started sweating, my heart was crazy, and I couldn't breathe well. It was a mess. My friend was scared and asked me what happened. I couldn't say anything at the time. I was extremely scared at this moment. Plus, I didn't want to believe that that figure caused all that. It must be something else. So I thought, well, I have diabetes, maybe my sugar level is low. So I got a cereal bar I had with me and started eating it, drank a bit of water, and tested my diabetes a minute later. It was 162 or something near to this, so no, it was not low sugar level. I already had my dinner at that time, it was totally fine. I didn't glance up too quickly to avoid the usual dizziness we experience. What options do we have left? To this day, I still believe this entity made me almost faint just by looking at it. After this episode I asked for help, went out for guidance on how to deal with this type of creature and situation, and I received much more bad advice than good ones, so yeah, I have many other stories following the bad advice I got and getting effed up. My best friend and I took a short vacation to the northern part of the Mitten in Michigan this weekend. Last night we decided to go to this old cemetery that my dad always took us kids to when we were younger so we could explore and do something a little spooky. My dad also went there as a kid with his siblings, so we have a long history of adventuring here, and I know this place like the back of my hand. The cemetery is down a good 20+ miles of rough, dirty, 2-track roads and is difficult to stumble onto without knowledge of its existence. There are no houses nearby for miles. There are the usual forest-dwelling creatures in the area, including the occasional elk and sometimes black bear, although I've never seen one. We pulled into the cemetery, it's 8 o'clock, and the sun has since set. We parked and got out. The two of us are always side by side in everything we do, as we like to experience things together. For some reason we said nothing to one another, and I felt drawn back to the far right corner of the cemetery, and she walked straight out and more to the left. I found a cool grave with some fake flowers that I was examining when I noticed how deafeningly quiet it was. I couldn't hear crickets or anything anymore, like I was in some weird bubble. As I was standing there, I heard the fake flowers at the grave rustling as if there was an animal in them. The flowers, right at my feet, were simple for me to shine my light down into and see that there was no critter hiding in them. As I was inspecting them, they shook again, and I just got the feeling like whatever this was telling me I needed to walk back to my friend. I started walking to find my friend and could see her light coming up over the small hill, and she was trying to signal something to me. When we met up, she told me that while she was looking around, she heard what sounded like a woman moaning or softly shouting. It was like a long drawn-out note or something, as she described it, and said it was coming from where I was. I didn't hear this noise at all because of the quiet bubble I seemed to be in, and it was interesting that we both had an experience that made us feel like we needed to find each other. As we are standing there talking about what we experienced, we hear loud branches snapping and rustling from this patch of trees/bushes to our left, about 40 feet away. This spooks us, so we start speed walking towards the car. My friend is shielding her face from the direction of the cluster of trees/bushes, and I didn't want to take my eyes off it in case it was something dangerous like a bear. As I peer around her, I see what looks like a person standing at attention but with nothing from the waist down, no legs, and it's just hovering there in the bushes. It looked the way something does when the moon hits it, kind of glowing and shimmering, but also not solid, almost like it's made up of fog or something. I'll note that there are no large gravestones in this area. There are only a few in the cemetery, and they are in the back, where she had initially explored. So at this point we are full on sprinting back to the car. We open the doors but then feel compelled to not get in. It was like, even though we wanted to, we both were overtaken by something and couldn't move at all and just stood there. We both remember thinking, why am I not getting in the car? Why do I suddenly feel like I just want to be out here exposed to whatever it is? These next events happen very fast, one after another, so we're standing there, and she hears a sound that I wouldn't even know how to describe, as I never heard it, behind us near the entrance to the cemetery. Then I noticed that in the other direction, one of the huge trees in the very middle of the cemetery was blowing around in the wind, while no other trees were moving at all. There was no wind. We comment about feeling like we are surrounded and being watched from everywhere. We return our attention to the cluster of trees and bushes where I saw the figure and notice a smaller figure on the ground, shining like it was in moonlight, crawling on the ground. It flickered in and out of existence. It was like a faint bluish-white color, semi-transparent but solid enough to mostly block out the small gravestone it was passing in front of. We grabbed each other's hands and stared at this thing for what felt like only a few moments before it disappeared, then manifested about 10 feet closer to us than it was before. It suddenly faded back into existence, right in front of us. This was when we finally broke free of whatever weird spiritual hold we felt was on us and scrambled to get into the car. We sat there freaking out. She's fumbling through her bag to find her keys and finally gets the car started. We don't see anything anymore, so we sat there for a couple minutes debating whether or not we should get out of the car again, against all of our instincts, as this energy we had been experiencing felt so dangerous. She rolls her window down and comments about how it seems like the cemetery got so much darker than it was just a few moments ago. It was like a thick, ultra-black darkness you could reach out and grab. It's difficult to explain. My eyes trailed up a tree near the original grave I had heard and seen the rustling fake flowers at earlier, and I noticed the same bluish/white/foggyish figure reach its hands around the tree and pull its head and part of its torso out from behind this tree and stare at us. It was at least 20 feet off the ground. The tree was a tall red pine with no climbing branches. We immediately peeled out of that cemetery and drove back to the cabin. We both felt disassociated and strange. What happened was so chaotic and terrifying that it was difficult to process. So, we are stuck on the timeline. When we got out of the car, we only adventured for 5 minutes at the most before we had our first experiences and met up with one another. Which was followed by the noise and the torso and a quick sprint to the car. This part probably only took like 2 to 3 minutes. When we get to the car, it gets weird because everything happened so quickly in succession. The noise she heard by the entrance, the lone tree moving, the small entity crawling on the ground, it couldn't have been more than 10 minutes. So that's about 15 minutes, 20 at most, if I'm being generous, of exploring and being terrified before we ended up just leaving. However, it was 9:09, as soon as we exited the gates, I checked the time on the dash. We got into the cemetery at 8:06. So, where did the other 40 minutes go? We've gone over it, and there is absolutely no way we were there for an hour. There's just no way. We felt like we were being heavily affected by something in there, and we lost time. We are both of sound mind, not crazy lol, ghost hunt a lot, do a lot of exploring, and don't spook easily. I have never experienced anything like this. It felt like just a barrage of energy and intensity, and my friend describes it as, whatever it was seemed hungry. Which gives me the chills. It felt like it was trying to put us into some altered state so it could get us. I have no idea what this or these things were, so I don't know what it wanted or what getting us meant. But I'm wondering if anyone has experience with feeling this way around any certain types of entities, cryptids, skinwalkers, etc. At this point, I'm just so at a loss because it was just unreal. We have no idea what it was that we encountered. And I know this sounds so crazy, but it's true. I don't know that I'll ever go out looking for the paranormal ever again. It really feels like it initially tried to split us up right off the rip. It feels like it was compelling us to do the opposite of what our instincts were telling us. Put us almost into a trance-like state where all we could do was stare at this thing crawling towards us, where we then just lost 40 minutes. We really wonder what would have happened if we hadn't snapped out of it and gotten in the car to leave. Reality truly felt completely altered by this thing, and it's the most bizarre, terrifying thing I've ever experienced. One time when I was 12, I was out playing with friends on the opposite end of the estate from my house. My mother was out with my brother somewhere, and my dad was out with my sister, and I was having a great time on a sunny day with my buddies. Suddenly, and inexplicably, I felt a strong compulsion to go home. My house was 3/4 of a mile away, an inconvenient distance for a 12-year-old who was in the middle of something else. The reason for this compulsion was because I just knew, that our new dog, a stray that we'd taken in, had started to chew the linoleum in the kitchen, and I had to stop her. I quickly left my friends. I would love to be able to remember what explanation I gave them, and cycled home as fast as I could. I let myself in, and, true enough, the dog had just started to chew the linoleum in the kitchen. I stopped her, took her out, gave her some food, and stayed in with her for the rest of the day. I always remember that day because it was so vivid, so unexpected, and so random. Why would some mystical force care whether or not the dog had chewed the linoleum? Well, whatever it was, I'm glad it called to me. After my parents divorced me, my siblings and my mom ended up living broke in a terrible part of town. That dog saw us through some rough times. It was a companion, a prowler alarm, a home entertainment system, and a source of constant comfort when we had nothing to our name. I literally cannot imagine repeating those years without the dog there. I learned recently that linoleum is not inert. It contains powerful toxins that, if ingested, can cause cancer. It can also fatally block a dog's digestive tract. If I hadn't intervened, the dog would likely have died sooner than it did, possibly within days, because my posturing hard case of a father would have happily been seen to put the dog down rather than shell out for an expensive operation. A spooky experience near Clay Elum, Washington. When I was 18, I went on my first trip alone to Seattle from Montana. I was alone with my dog, and it was a pretty normal trip overall, except we were driving late at night. I was listening to the BBC talk show on AM, and they were talking about some subject I don't remember, but it was spooky, and the radio was super static. We were in the area of I-90 that doesn't have much signal and is pretty much just 100% empty and quiet before the pass. I suddenly got really tired, and my radio wasn't working, so I decided to pull off to sleep. I decided to pull off on a deserted exit with no services before Clay Elum. I believe it was called a 6-mile road or something like that. Anyway, it was extremely dark. I couldn't see anything to my sides or in front of me. There was fog on the road, swirling around just in front of my headlights. There was absolutely nothing around me for a mile, and the road didn't veer off anywhere. After a bit of driving, I pulled up to this huge white/gray warehouse with no windows. There were several white vans and black cars parked around. They looked very expensive for being in the middle of nowhere. The warehouse was locked by a huge barbed wire fence. I backed up my car a bit and decided to park by the tree since it didn't appear that anyone was around. Everything was still dark and silent. There was no wind except for a slight breeze carrying the fog around the cement. I turned my car off completely and wrapped myself up in my blanket. I locked all the doors. I was laying there, trying to sleep, and looking at the time on my phone. It was 2 a.m. That same moment, my car started to physically shake. My dog started whining and hid behind the passenger chair, obviously distressed. I looked outside my window, but everything was pitch black without my headlights. I couldn't see anything, but my car was shaking back and forth, side to side, like something was grabbing it. I turned it on, freaking out, and backed up. There was still nothing around me at all, except for the strange facility. There were no animals, no people. My car stopped shaking as soon as I backed up. I had this horrible feeling of dread that I was being watched and that I wasn't supposed to be there. I left the area as fast as I could. When I got back to the road, I noticed that my car's time was now 4:30 a.m. and I had 1/4 of a tank less gas. It was already getting light out. I don't remember going anywhere, and my phone's time matched the car. There's only 1 hour of time difference between Montana and WA, so it wasn't that. I still don't know what happened there. I tried looking up the area with my ex on Google Maps a year ago, and I found a weird government facility near Clay Elum with a weird name that may have been the warehouse I went to. I'll have to try to find it again. It definitely feels like something I should not have seen. So I saw this about 4 years ago at work, and it creeped me the duck out. I work for a digital surveillance company that runs the eye in the sky for thousands of restaurants, bars, and gas stations across the US. From time to time we get calls for investigations to look into robberies, theft, etc. So one day, we get a call from a popular fast food chain located in the heart of Detroit. They say an employee OD'd by the dumpster, and they needed us to get some answers on the situation. First, basically, what happened, and how long was he there? The next question is where it starts to get weird. See, the dumpster had a brick wall around it. It had 2 entrances to the dumpster, a gate you had to pass when you walked out the back door and the big gates where the garbage truck has access to the dumpster to empty it out. They claimed those big gates were always open and the small gate by the back door was locked from the inside. Nobody ever used that smaller gate. The weird thing was when the body was found, an employee walked out, that gate that was never open was indeed open, and the body was sitting there on full display, so their next question was who the duck opened that gate? So we download the footage. One night the employee goes outside, throws out the trash, and you can kind of see him through the locked gate that was never open. It was see-through but very difficult to see though. The way the camera was angled, you could kind of see over the top also. He injects himself, slumps over, and keels over dead behind the dumpster. He was out there for 2.5 days. No employees ever come looking for him. It's pouring rain both days. For 2 days, employees come and go taking out the trash and not seeing him. Then, on the 3rd day in the morning sunshine, clear as ducking day, the gate just slowly opens by itself. Nobody comes, nobody goes. The gate just ducking opens. By itself, and the body is sitting there in the same position it was 2.5 days earlier. I literally felt chills down my spine. To this day, I can't explain it without thinking it was paranormal. Anyway, a couple hours later, an employee walks out with a trash bag, sees the body, freaks out, and calls the police. I didn't write it, but we basically had to write a report on how a gate apparently opened itself. I am an avid and experienced urban explorer. I have visited many different abandoned sites. This place I'm writing about has been explored several times by others since, but when I visited, it wasn't a common knowledge location, and all the buildings were still intact except for the main house, which, according to what I had heard, had burned, leaving nothing but the outer stone wall. Nothing, but the outer wall remains. All the other buildings were torn down since I was there. To more recent urban explorers, it is known as the Stone Castle, and more recently the Osler Castle. This is the name given by the Heritage Society that has decided to fix it up. When my boyfriend at the time discovered it, he saw it in the distance from a roof he was working on in Oromodanti, on. There was, but not anymore, a large barn, a carriage house, and towards the back of the property, a stable. The first weekend we both had off together, we made the hour-long drive to explore it. The property was absolutely stunning. On top of a hill back from the road, you could almost imagine living surrounded by such beauty, and we did exactly that. The house itself was gone except for the wall, and if you looked in the basement window, you could see an old stove laying amongst the wreckage. You could tell it had been a beautiful home at one time, to whomever owned it. Being the explorer I was, I insisted that we investigate every single corner of every single building that was on the property, and although my ex was less than enthusiastic about it, I insisted. I honestly did not see the point of driving for an hour just to look at the outside of the buildings. No, I had to go in the buildings. The first building we explored was the barn, both upstairs and down. Down in the basement of the barn is where things went from wow to holy shit really fast. The basement had been used as a place for satanic sacrifices. There was satanic artwork all over, a knife with what appeared to be blood on it, an altar with black candles, and a bottle of what smelled like blood. The most disturbing piece was that whatever satanic group was using it, they had built a makeshift cage out of the silo with chains inside and everything. My boyfriend, at the time, wanted to get the heck out of there as fast as possible, but I convinced him to stay so we could explore the rest of the buildings on the property. I told him it was probably just a bunch of kids, just screwing around, no big deal, right? Wrong. Our next stop was the stables at the back of the property, and honestly, I was so caught up in my love for exploring that he would not have been able to persuade me to leave without going into every single building, no matter what. I opened the door into the stable, and the smell hit me, rotting flesh, and the entire room was littered with animal corpses, dogs, cats, rabbits, even coyotes and foxes. They had been horribly mutilated. It was absolutely the worst thing I have ever laid my eyes on. As soon as my boyfriend saw that, he grabbed me and said that we were leaving right at that moment, and that killing animals is not stupid kids doing stupid things, this is some serious shit. So we started to leave, but there was one more building. I wanted to check on the way out of the carriage house, but he said no effing way were we going there and stomped off up the hill back to the main house, assuming I would follow. I didn't follow. I went around the hill by myself and took a quick peek in the carriage house. The carriage house was anticlimactic, it had absolutely nothing in it. It's actually a good thing that I snuck off like I did, because if I hadn't, we wouldn't have seen them coming. They would have been able to sneak up on us as we were coming up the hill and do God knows what to us. The first one I noticed was an adult male with a baseball bat. He actually had opened our car door and was rifling through things in our car trying to find a key, I'm guessing. There were about 8 people in total in the group, ranging from adults, I would say in their 30s, to teenagers and children, no more than 12 or 13. They all had weapons, golf clubs, sticks, cane, and baseball bats. I yelled at the guy, what the hell he thought he was doing going through our car, and my boyfriend came charging over the hill, bless his heart, right through the posse of creeps and weirdos, who seemed to be lying in wait for us. It appeared that we had ruined whatever plans they had in mind because they immediately backed off, some even tried to hide their weapons behind their backs, which was just stupid if you ask me. Who wouldn't notice a baseball bat behind somebody's back? The baseball bat guy demanded to know what we were doing there, and I demanded to know what the hell he thought he was doing in our car. He didn't answer, he just looked at me all nervous. My ex-boyfriend said we were just admiring the architecture of the house and that we were just leaving, and they let us get into our car and drive off, which in itself was a miracle, I'd say, in light of what we had discovered on the property. They followed us in a black pickup with no plates for a good 20 minutes. Instead of heading for home, we went to the closest city, which was Barry, on. We filed a report with a policeman who seemed more shaken than us and headed home. My ex never went back to that roofing job again. He had someone else finish it, and he went to another one. I wanted to go back, but after telling people what happened, I couldn't find anyone to go with me. My ex and I continued various explorations, but we both started carrying knives. I still carry one to this day, even when I hike. I have not read of anyone else having similar experiences at Satan's Castle. Recently, my cousin, who is also an explorer, contacted me with a place she wanted to explore. Guess where? And guess what? We have made arrangements to go there in the next couple of weeks. So on that note, and many years later, Satan's Castle cult, let's hope we don't meet again. And to any other urban explorers out there, please be careful, you never know what you might come across in these abandoned places. This took place last year in the summer of 2018. I was on a photo shoot for my college. It was for a project based at the well-known landmark Iron Bridge Gorge. To give a brief overview, Iron Bridge is located in Shropshire, England. It is well known for both the iconic Iron Bridge that spans the River Severn and its proximity to Much Wenlock, which is home to the Wenlock Edge and Shropshire Hills. Anyway, I went alone, and it was meant to rain on the same day. So after planning to photograph the entire Iron Bridge Gorge from Telford to Much Wenlock, I boarded the numerous buses linking the town with Telford and then Much Wenlock. I happened to find a huge problem with a part of my shoot. It was that I also mapped out photographing Iron Bridge Power Station. It was closed in 2015 and was in the process of demolition. I could not photograph close due to strict rules on photographers. I ended up capturing from afar and then proceeding afterwards to walk up the long, closed Much Wenlock branch line. Now to give a brief story of the line, it was a passenger railway that connected Wellington and Telford to Craven Arms near Church Stretton. It ran via Much Wenlock and onto the Welsh Marches line. It closed to Craven Arms in the 1950s but served Much Wenlock until the 1960s. The line has since been removed and is partially open as a footpath. The rest of the line is a main road to Craven Arms, with the exception of sections near Craven Arms where it is still traceable. I was looking. Legend says that if a man was foolhardy enough to challenge the 13th century robber knight with these words, Ippikin, Ippikin, keep away with your long chin. The consequences, not to put a fine point on it, could be fatal. Ippikin was a fierce man of sour temper and evil looks. Some said he was an ancient magician who had found the secret of renewing life every 70 years. He and his bandits terrorized the locality. No one dared approach his cave for fear of attack, even though it was rumored to be full of Ipican's booty of treasure and precious stones. Where men feared, however, nature lent a hand in bringing the robber knight his deserved comeuppance. During a raging storm, lightning struck a huge rock overhanging the cave. It toppled, crashing down across the entrance and trapping Ipican and his murderous band inside. To this day, however, it is unwise to challenge Ipican, who stalks the edge with his men, pushing the unwary to their deaths over a cliff. And doubters beware. Above Upper Hill Farm lies Ipican's rock. Look close, and you can see the mark of a gold chain the robber wore, or should we say wears? 2. The other one, also from Shropshire Tourism, is about a 17th century timbered house in Much Wenlock ghostly faces. The distinctive facade of Reynolds House in Much Wenlock's High Street hides many unexplained phenomena. The fine timber-framed 17th century building has a mid-floor balcony on which children still play, spinning tops. Their faces peer out from the windows. Look closer. Their faces seem ghostly, and the clothes they wear are not of this time but Victorian. So after making my way to Much Wenlock on foot, which took over an hour, I stopped to rest and grabbed a drink. I noticed on my photos so strange orbs around the road I had walked on, but I put it down to dust particles. After finishing up in Much Wenlock, where nothing happened, I made my way to Wenlock Edge, and after reading about the Ipican legend, I decided to try a little paranormal experiment. I said the line as mentioned above to provoke the ghost. I stayed at a safe distance from the edge of Wenlock Edge. I heard a noise behind me and looked, but nothing was there. I then began to hear footsteps and put it down to a hiker or explorer, as a holiday camp was only a half-mile away, but then I noticed there were no cars or signs of people around me. I then began to panic, noticing that I had provoked an upset spirit, and prayed to God that nothing happened to me. I then saw something move in the woodlands, but it was not an animal. It looked like a mist. I then grabbed my equipment and belted it to my car. There I saw it, there was a figure that had begun to walk towards my car. I put my foot down and sped away from the scene. I then stopped off nearly 20 miles away in Market Drayton, and I was thankful to be back around people. I was shaking from what just transpired, and I then went back home after getting something to eat as well as some fuel. After doing my research into the incidents, I found that there was apparently in Buildwas near Ironbridge a monk that haunted the power station and the nearby abbey ruins. And then I came across the legend of Ipican, whom I did not know about. I had simply said, any ghosts here really are scared to be seen, huh? I regret saying that once the full-bodied apparition appeared. I then read into it, and there is a small consequence that I was spared that evening. Had I had any closer to Wenlock Edge, I could have been pushed down the very long drop to my death. I am thankful I remained at a safe point. I share this story to remind you viewers to always read into legends and stories before venturing to tell your own tale of the supposed haunting. Sometimes they are told for a reason, and some are not to be confronted by mindless investigations. My shoot turned from a simple landscape expedition to a nightmare, which almost cost me my life. Be careful what you wish for, sometimes the request can be ugly and evil if that. Like 15 years ago there was a block of land in Kellyville that had an old abandoned house on it. Actually I don't know if it was abandoned, obviously someone owned the land. But the house was basically like a rundown, haunted house that nobody lived in. Anyway, we were teenagers and wandered into the house, snooping around. There was not much furniture in the place other than a few chairs laying around and a desk. There were pages of writing in the drawers of the desk that seemed to be drafts of some guy writing letters to his mother. The letters were quite abusive and were blaming the mother for all sorts of things and saying he wished she would die. It was almost like somebody planted it there because they knew young people would sneak in and find them. But there was something about the amount of pages and that they all kind of said the same things in different words that made it seem like it was actually a real letter that someone was trying to write. Our group then split into two. Half the group continued exploring inside the house, and a friend and I went outside the house. There was a shipping container/site shed on the property behind the house. We walked in, and it was very creepy. It was nothing but dusty porcelain dolls wall to wall. There must have been like 300 of them in there, and they were all cracked and dirty and kind of facing the door, so it was like every one of them was staring at you at once. We left that shed creeped out and decided to go smoke a cigar near the fence and wait for the rest of the group so we could leave. After a few minutes, our group came out of the house, and were coming towards us, not running but walking quickly and with intent. They were just like, let's duck and go, and we followed them until they finally slowed down about 2 streets away. They told us that they found a room that had a bunch of bloody towels on the floor and then walked out into the hallway, and there was a dude in there that was about 50 years old who just looked at them and walked past them into one of the rooms without saying anything or reacting to their presence at all. After that, they made a beeline for the door. They kept saying the guy must have been a deranged killer or something, but in retrospect, it was probably some junkie squatting in there. My great-grandfather, great-grandmother, their 4 kids, and their dog moved into this old farmhouse in rural central Illinois. I never personally encountered the farmhouse, as all this occurred in the late 70s, very early 80s. Here are the real terrifying encounters my family members had in this house. When they first moved in, a woman approached them at the grocery store. She told them that their dog would die, that the house was evil, and that terrible things would happen to them. Basically some Amityville horror shite, lol. They brushed it off as though she were trying to scare them because she wanted the house, etc. Note, my great-grandma had a previous husband whom she had 5 of her 6 kids with. Only 4 of the kids ever lived in the farmhouse. My grandma, my great-grandma's daughter and 4th kid, was the result of an affair with the great-grandpa who is in this story. That's a whole different story, but the bloodline thing is crucial to this story. After the lady had told them all the things that would happen to them, every single thing happened. They honestly thought she was a witch who cursed them because of how accurate she was on what would happen. Not long after they moved in, their dog died from being hit by a car. After that, my great-grandpa turned mean. So mean that all the kids hated him, even some of the adults. He went full dad from Amityville horror, besides the trying to kill his family thing. That they know of, my grandma wouldn't leave that house. It's as if it had a gravitational pull on her. They believed that my great-grandpa and my grandma were possessed by the house. My Aunt Carrie, the youngest child, swears up and down that she saw Dracula in that house. To clarify, all the adults were playing cards downstairs. My aunt was younger at the time and was playing near the hallway. When she looked up, she saw what she describes as Dracula looking back at her. She was hysterical. My great-grandpa actually had to slap her across the face just so she would calm down. No surprise, they didn't believe her. Another incident is when my great-grandpa yelled for all the kids to come downstairs. I guess there was a door that led to the 2nd floor stairs that you entered and exited out of. The kids couldn't find the door. It disappeared. My great-grandfather was getting impatient and was yelling at them. He couldn't hear them at all. They said they were on the other side shouting that they couldn't find the door. Something else similar to that happened to my great-grandmother's niece. She had gone upstairs and walked past where she thought the kids were playing. They were being loud, so she opened and stood at the door and went to yell at them, but of course, no one was there. I know, how cliché. But when she went downstairs and described to my great-grandparents which room and door it was, they said, "There's no room there, it's a door that leads to the outside. It's also boarded up, so there's no way you could have opened it." So, if she had actually opened that door and even tried to walk into the room, she would have fallen from the 2nd story of the house. She was so freaked out that she left and never came back after that. She swore there was a room and door there. The house obviously liked to play with your mind. My uncle took a picture outside of the house with his hands kind of posed. When he got them back from the development, they said they needed to show him something. In the proofs of the pictures, his posed hands were being held down by something. Now, here is where more bloodline comes in. My great-grandma's ex-husband and baby daddy married her new husband's daughter and had 2 children. So, it was a messed up family circle. Since they were all intertwined, my grandma's ex-husband/stepson-in-law and stepdaughter/her kid's stepmom/stepsister would stay with them sometimes. The first and last time they stayed in the farmhouse was when they were asleep on the 2nd floor. Some family was downstairs playing cards when they heard a bed squeaking violently. Now you know what they thought was happening, and they were a little disturbed. They tried to ignore it, but it was non-stop. One of the adults went to tell the ex-husband and his new wife to please quiet down. When they knocked and there was no answer, the adult reluctantly opened the door. The ex-husband and new wife were sound asleep and fully clothed. The next morning, when the ex and new wife were told about what happened, they slept in their camper for the rest of their visit. There was also this reoccurring red spot that no matter how much you scrubbed it, it would always come back. I'm sure there's much more stuff, but these are the most recurring things that I've heard. Unfortunately, the only person who could tell you anything she's experienced in that house was my grandma, who has since passed. Note, years later, they found out that my great-grandmother's oldest daughters, husbands, and uncles, try saying that 10 times fast, actually hung themselves in the basement. He had done that years before they moved in. My family only stayed there because they were not financially stable enough to leave. After they finally moved out, a new family moved in. The new family stayed there for a week and then stayed in their RV for the rest of the time till they could find a new house. After that family moved, the farmhouse burned down. I'm not really sure if the house caught on fire or if it was burned down on purpose. I've driven past where it was located so many times. It's all cornfield now. The old grain silos that sat with it are still there, but that's it. I'll always wonder what happened to make the farmhouse so evil. So this story actually happened earlier this year, in May. For some context, I do believe in the paranormal but have never had any of my own experiences. Two of the girls I was with, Molly and Carrie, we'll call them, very much believe in the paranormal and have had multiple scary experiences. The last girl, who we'll call Moxie, is very in the middle. It's also important to note that everyone was sober except Moxie and me, who were high. I smoke every day, so I would have considered myself sober. Anyways, the power had gone out at Carrie's apartment because of a really bad hurricane, and it was going to be a few days. Carrie lives in a very sketchy area of Tallahassee and also didn't have great roommates, so we decided we'd go to her sister Molly's apartment instead, where Moxie also lives. After 2 days or so, we needed to grab some things from Carrie's apartment, but the problem was that it was dark out and the tally was still in total blackout. So we all said we'd go together. Me and Moxie piled in the back, and Carrie and Molly sat in the front, Molly driving. We get there, and we parked facing another row of cars about 3 car lengths away, aka close enough to tell what's in front of you with your headlights beaming out. Molly and Carrie come back out, and when we turn on the car and the headlights shine, mind you, they were only gone about a minute and a half, and no one was anywhere near us when we got there. Anyway, when the headlights turn on, we see what appears to be a man standing in between 2 cars, almost leaning over the one. Except he was wearing bright blue jeans and a red shirt, and he was completely white, not pale white. He was also standing inhumanly still and almost looked like he was out of focus. Like you couldn't fully make him out despite him being so close. He was just staring at us, with no face, literally not even depth. Just literally white space. Safe to say we got out of there, and Carrie never ever slept there again and actually ended up moving out shortly after because it always felt off being there like something was there. It was the freakiest thing I've ever seen, and I am somewhat skeptical, but this was truly unexplainable to me. You could say it's a guy in a morph suit, but that doesn't explain the extreme stillness and the fact that he was blurry. This happened on Halloween 2019. My friends and I were feeling the spooky vibes of the month and wanted to do something fun and exciting to satisfy our thirst. Being the dumb college students that we were, we decided on exploring somewhere allegedly haunted in the hopes of seeing some genuine paranormal activity. Since we're from Illinois, the popular destination of Bachelor's Grove Cemetery immediately came to mind, and it was settled upon. Once the sun had set and night had fallen, we'd make our move, sneaking into the cemetery after it had closed to get the full experience without having to worry about any other visitors. I must admit, I always wanted to do something like this before, but I was genuinely afraid of what might be waiting for us in that cemetery so late at night. Stories always circulated around of the various apparitions people had encountered before, the different sounds that chilled them to the bone, and so on. Anyway, all of this was festering inside of me well before we actually started driving over to the cemetery sometime in the evening. It was a pleasantly long drive, but I wasn't really in the mood to think about anything else except for the potential horrors that roamed the cemetery for all of eternity, or so they say. Couple in the fact that we were going to be trespassing in order to get through in the first place, and I was a nervous wreck. My friends were apparently doing a much better job at keeping their fears in check, though. For the sake of the story, I'll call them Logan, Paul, and Eddie. The entire car ride there, they were laughing and joking around, not worried about what we would be getting into or what we might see. Looking back at the whole situation, I should have known that their optimism was a bad sign. No way would we have been able to explore this place without them being the slightest bit nervous. But what's done is done. A little past 7, once night had finally fallen for real and darkness went on in every direction, for as far as the eye could see, we arrived. Parking in the main parking lot was out of the question, because we did some investigating and found that in previous years, local law enforcement liked to wait there and catch any would-be explorers before they could even get inside. So we had a backup plan. Since the actual cemetery was located in the center of a dense forest on all sides, essentially forming a square where all the roads would go around it, we were to park at some restaurant that was open super late and had a huge parking lot all the way in the back, furthest away from the restaurant itself and closest to the road. This was in the exact opposite direction from the front entrance of the cemetery, so we figured this was our best chance of getting in while avoiding any cops in our way. From there, we'd cross the street on foot and have a bit of a walk before arriving at a somewhat hidden path leading into the forest. Taking this back path would take a bit more time to get to the actual cemetery because these trees were particularly thick and dense, but it was well worth it when considering the alternative. After everything was said and done, we found ourselves beginning our trek onto the path, unsure of how far we'd actually have to go before we'd find what we were looking for. It was a windy night, and even though it wasn't especially cold or anything, I still remember my teeth chattering and my skin going chilly. Aside from the occasional sound of leaves being crunched under our shoes as we walked, there was absolute silence. My once cheerful and energetic friends were now, all of a sudden, quiet and subdued. Logan in particular had this odd expression on his face, it being illuminated by my phone's flashlight as we walked. It was some sort of cross between fear and pain, like every step he took was causing him physical harm. Before I could question him about it, we found ourselves at our destination. Here we were, in the heart of Bachelor's Grove, with graves all around us and a certain chill in the air. Everyone split up to cover more ground, promising to call the others over if they were to encounter something. I didn't want us going too far away from one another, but I also didn't want to seem like a pussycat, so I kept my mouth shut and began exploring. Most of the graves I looked at had withered away from time and the elements, so I couldn't really make out anything that was on the tombstones. The few dates that I could read went back to the late 1800s, and a sinking feeling in my stomach started once I realized these people had been dead and decaying in the ground for over 100 years. Feeling extremely uncomfortable with this realization, I began to back away from the graves and started to look for my friends to see if they had found anything supernatural, but all of a sudden, I heard it. Not just me either, all of us did. It was low, almost unnoticeable if you weren't paying attention, but with the way our senses were heightened, there was no way we would miss it. It appeared to be some sort of chanting, and it sounded like it was coming a little bit north from our direction, further into a clearing. I couldn't make any of the words being spoken, or if it was even in English, but there was something creepy about the tone. Like it was religious, and the chanting was some sort of prayer. The voice that was doing the chanting was deep and gravelly, belonging to some man that we couldn't see. The four of us shined our lights on each other to see our expressions, and at that moment, we knew what we were going to do. Despite every fiber in my being telling me not to go any further and see what the source of this chanting was, my curiosity got the better of me, and I couldn't resist. Eddie whispered to us to turn our lights off completely, while he dimmed his just enough to where it wouldn't attract too much attention but we would still be able to see with it. The next few moments we spent creeping towards the noise, the more and more I started to lose it. My breathing was uncontrollable, and it felt like my heart was beating 1,000,000 miles an hour. I was so afraid of what we would find, and yet I still had to know. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, we had entered the clearing and were a mere few steps away from the chanting. Eddie shone his light in the direction ahead of us, and for just a brief moment, we saw a cloaked figure bent over something in the grass, still chanting in that unrecognizable language. The thing in the grass looked like some sort of circle with a mark in the center, and I swear to God, I wish I could tell you I'm lying about this, but when I realized what the symbol was, I felt like throwing up. There was no mistake, it was a pentagram, made of some strange material. For the moment that Eddie had illuminated the sight in front of us, I had been able to get a glimpse of the pentagram's material being bright red, and I shouldn't have to say any more about that. Once the light from Eddie's phone hit the back of the man's head, he immediately stopped chanting and stood up, still facing the direction of the pentagram. I can only describe the next few minutes as truly unadulterated terror. Because before we knew it, he screamed a blood-curdling scream that rattled us to the core and turned around, beginning to sprint towards us. Everything happened so fast, I couldn't even make out the man's facial features except for deep, sunken eyes and an expression that radiated pure hatred. He really did want to bring us harm. Not wasting any time, we all fled the direction we came from and ran faster than I think any of us had ever run in our entire lives. I couldn't even scream while running away, I was too petrified to make any noise. Maybe it was a miracle, but we somehow managed to trace our steps all the way through the path we took to enter the cemetery and forest, and eventually came out to the main road, which was devoid of any traffic for the time being. Afraid of what I would see if I looked back, I made a beeline to the car along with the others and hopped into the back seat, not wasting any time to lock the door and roll up the window. We peeled out of there in no time flat and didn't stop driving 20 over the speed limit until we were at least 10 minutes away. I honestly have no idea how far or for how long that man chased us, but I do know this for sure, we weren't supposed to be there that night, and we must have been interrupting something important of his. I'll never know what it was, and honestly, I don't hope to ever find out. We never did talk about this experience again after that night, and we never went on another trip to somewhere abandoned or haunted ever again either. I think that fright we felt is enough to satisfy us for the rest of our lives, and I'm thankful beyond words that we all managed to get out together alive. I've had many paranormal encounters starting from my teenage years, intensifying in my early adulthood, and seemingly tapering off now that I'm in my late 30s. The first experience that I remember was in 9th grade, coming home from school. My parents were both working, so usually I'm home by myself until late dinner. I usually get the rice started in the rice cooker and thaw the meats. This afternoon, I was extra tired from wrestling practice, so I was relieved when I came home and heard rustling in the kitchen and the faucet turning on and off. I didn't actually look in there to see who it was, but I assumed it was my mom because sometimes she'd get home early from her restaurant job, sometimes they have private events and they'd send some waitstaff home. I turned the corner to the bedroom and yelled out to her, "Can you wake me up in like an hour? I wanted to study for a test tomorrow." I heard her say, in a raspy voice, "Okay, Con." Con is a Vietnamese term addressing your own child. I thought nothing of it. Maybe she's feeling a little sick. I woke up from the landline phone ringing. Cell phones in the early 2000s were available, but we were poor, so only the adults had them. It was my mom asking me if I wanted the leftover food from the restaurant. I told her, "Did you go back to the restaurant for leftover food?" She said no, she's been working the whole time. Chills ran down my back. It was twilight, and the sun was setting, so the whole house had an eerie semi-darkness to it. I told my mom to hurry up home, please. I did not lock my bedroom door so I could see out into the dark hallway. I jumped up to go lock the bedroom door and turned on the light, opened the window, and turned on the radio, anything to drown out the silence and the dark. Eventually, my dad got home first. I was so relieved to see him but didn't know if I should tell him what happened. I waited till dinner time to slip in casually that I thought mom was home earlier and was doing something in the kitchen. She denied it, and they concluded that I must have imagined the whole thing, but I know I didn't. Someone was in the house, rustling in the kitchen, turning the faucet on off, and imitating my mom's in its raspy voice. It called me Con, so my first thought was that it understood Vietnamese. No relatives we knew were going to come over, nor did they have the keys to the house. To this day, I still don't know what it was or how it mimicked my mom's. It wasn't the only spooky thing that happened in that apartment, but it was the first and spookiest. To start off, I'll say this happened in the house I grew up on, built on Indian tribal lands and next to a road known for its paranormal activities. Most Native Americans in the town won't even go out on this road or near this property, and I had given my mom several warnings about the place when we first moved in. They know evil resides there. I don't mind sharing the name of the road because the more facts, the better, but I won't share the exact location of the house because my family still lives there. The road is called Black Ranch Road, Bernie ca. The road itself is said to be haunted. The story goes that people who drive down it drunk will see a little girl playing with her ball, and she will cause you to crash because she was hit by a drunk driver one day while out playing with her ball. So now that you know a little bit about the place, I'll get to the main story. I was about 14 at the time. My youngest sister, who for the sake of the story we'll call Louise, was around 9 or 10. She had her own room, while my other sister and I were forced to share a room. It was a normal night. We ate dinner, did homework, and shuffled off to bed. It was around midnight when I woke up feeling just weird. There was a pit in my stomach, and I felt that something was off. Then I heard it, a soft crying noise coming from the other side of the wall in my sister's bedroom. I didn't hesitate. I propelled myself off my bed from the top bunk so fast that I landed kind of awkwardly, hitting my face on the ground. But I didn't care. I was up and flying out of the room before the pain could set in. I burst through Louise's door and flipped on the lights. She was lying with her face toward the wall, crying. When I asked what was wrong, she said she saw something. At first she was confused as to what she saw. She said she had rolled over in her bed, and when she looked across her room, there was something crawling up her dresser. She thought it was our cat at first, but then as she watched it more, she figured out it wasn't a cat at all. What she said next still gives me chills. It was a man, wearing a hat and coat, leaning against her dresser, watching her. She said she stared at him for a long time, not sure what to make of it, when it or he moved slightly toward her. That's when she got scared, rolled over in her bed to face the wall, and started crying. She said she could see his eyes, and she just knew he was staring at her. Since Louise was only 9 at the time, I knew there was no way she could have made this up. After that, we looked up what she had described and saw that many other people had the same experience. The shadow man is real. My family and I have experienced many other spooky things in that house while living there, and I have a lot more stories to share. Unexplained things have happened to me the last 3 years, including an encounter with an interdimensional being. 2020. On December 1st, I saw an UFO in the evening. I also heard 2 fighter jets involved in a chase with, what I believe, an UFO over my city earlier that day. The most interesting thing about this one is that I don't believe I've ever seen any UFO flying like what I saw in any video on the internet. What I saw was absolutely insane experience. 2021. I was sitting in my kitchen, and I turned my head to the window and checked if the sun had gone down. I turned the head back, and I saw a gray thing standing beside me on the right side. I could only see partial of that thing, though. My brain reacted to it, and I turned my head away and back. The thing had disappeared. 2022. In the spring, I was in my kitchen and picked up some food. I saw in the side vision of my right eye that a gray ghost-looking being walked towards me. I didn't move my head but just followed that thing in the side view. It disappeared when it came close to me, though. 2. In the summer I was in my living room, and I looked out of the window for some unknown reason. I saw something black but also transparent flying at low speed and flew in from the upper right to the lower left of the window. I just followed it with my eyes. I wondered first if it was a black plastic bag or something similar, but that thing didn't flutter at all. It was staying in the same form all the time. I live on the top floor in a 3-story apartment building. That building is formed like a L, and from the window to the wall is just like 20 meters / 21 yards / 66 feet. It must have flown straight into the rest of the building because it didn't slow down at all. The whole thing was super weird, even more weird than the other stuff. 3. On what I believe was the night between Saturday, November 26th, and Sunday, November 27th, and the clock was between 4 o'clock 4 a.m. and 5 o'clock 5 a.m., I was sitting at my computer in my living room. The only light sources were the computer monitor, the computer tower, and the balcony door. I saw something black appear in front of the balcony door in the side vision of my right eye. I turned my head towards it, and I saw a tall humanoid, complete black, standing in my living room. I guess it looked a little slenderish and was around 195 centimeters / 6'5" tall. My brain reacted to it, and I turned my head away and back. It had disappeared. Maybe 5 seconds later I feel something very tiny being injected into my right upper arm. I noticed it, but I couldn't see anything when I looked at the arm. I've never had that feeling before. I'm still trying to figure out how the hell that thing just appeared in front of the balcony door, though. I believe that the humanoid actually moved somehow when that thing appeared but stood still when I looked at it. I've read that some people who have encountered aliens have claimed that the aliens took over their minds, hypnosis, which this humanoid did not, for some unknown reason, what I'm aware of. On the following Wednesday, November 30th, I got some weird feelings in my right arm, and especially the upper part of the arm. It was like something was interfered with the muscles or something like that. I believe it took some hours before the feeling faded away. On December 5th, I was in downtown and had a meeting with some dudes. We had some break, and I watched my phone, and the clock was 11:03 a.m. The meeting resumed after a couple minutes, and we discussed for maybe another 10 minutes. Then I saw a transition in front of my eyes, from right to left, from talking and using my hands to looking down at the table and being quiet. I noticed that the other began to stand up, and the meeting was apparently over. I did not hear anything that the meeting leader had announced that the meeting was over. I looked at my phone again, and the clock was 11:31 a.m. I believe that I advanced like 10 minutes or so in just a second. That has never happened before, either the transition or that I could advance in time. The guys at the meeting appeared to not be aware of it at all. They didn't mention anything after the meeting. I've tried to bring it up, but when I'm about to do it, I stop myself because that sort of question is absolutely insane to ask. I had an unrelated wound on the left leg and was bandaged. When I came home and checked it, the wound and the bandage looked like what they looked like before I headed to downtown. I was a little confused by that. I guess they can alter time or reality to restore what they had done with an abductee? Because I couldn't also find any marks that some abductees claimed to get from when they were abducted. I believe also that the humanoid put some sort of tracker in my arm so they could locate me when they needed to pick me up, I guess. 5. In the mid-late of December, before Christmas, I had a similar experience like I had in 2021, but this time I was standing and the thing was black. I guess that humanoid maybe returned, huh? 2023. It was the night between Monday, Jan 16th, and Tuesday, Jan 17th, and around 2 o'clock 2 p.m., no lights were on in the apartment. I walked into my bedroom. I had the window half covered. I turned and sat on the edge of the bed. I saw something in the hallway, I believe, and something white flew very irregularly into the bedroom and towards me. It disappeared when it was close to my face. I looked straight at it the whole time. I turned around immediately and looked through the window to see if it was something outside that did this. But no, I couldn't see any movement at all. This is actually the first time it became little spooky since all this began to happen, even more than the encounter with the humanoid. My first thought was that they were about to pick me up again. I fell asleep later and woke up as normal though. Since all this started, It has been many strange and weird lights appearing in thin air in my side vision of the eyes, mostly in my living room but also sometimes in my bedroom. Mostly white lights but also red lights twice, once in each room. When I looked at the lights, they disappeared. Last week, I believe sometime between Thursday and Saturday, when I walked from the bedroom to either the kitchen or the bathroom, I turned my head and was about to look into the living room. I saw a pretty large, dark yellow light, not round but little rectangular shaped, looked like an old covered outdoor lamp with grid pattern, hovering a little bit over my couch in the side view. When I looked at it, it disappeared. The lights only appear when it's dark in the room/apartment, except for the lights from the computer tower/computer monitor. When the dark yellow light appeared, the computer was off, though. I know it can be some issues with the eyes, like retinal detachment, but when I watched videos about it, the flashes looked different than what I talked about here. I've never seen the flying thing or the dark yellow light before. It's been only 18 days of the new year, and 2 things have happened already. My biggest question is, why would the humanoid even appear on that night, though? If that thing didn't do that and just interacted with my arm from another dimension, I'd just scratch it and wouldn't think about it anymore. So I guess it wanted to show me its existence when it decided to go into the dimensions I could perceive when it showed itself in front of something that had lights? I believe the humanoid was a tall gray. I don't believe it was a biological robot but a real one because it was aware of how it looked in my living room and where the lights were before it appeared. Very intriguing though. But I'm thankful that I've experienced this, except the flying white thing, because it's confirming some of the things I've been talking about here. When I was just 18 years old, I temporarily moved in with my best friend. They were a big Christian family, and the house felt pretty homey being around them. Nothing abnormal happened in that house until I moved in for some reason. In my defense, I was also Christian, although I wasn't playing my part as well as I needed in that sense. I was still a good kid and never did anything to initially bring bad energy around. I shared a room with my best friend, and things were nice. But just a few days into being there, I noticed that things just felt off about the house. It started with her TV simply turning off/on by itself, switching channels, and getting extremely loud for no reason, but I just thought that maybe her TV was just stupid. Her little lights above her bed headboard would just start going off at night, and it just started making me feel weird. Papers and small things would straight fly off her nightstand, and at that point we got spooked because, how is that flying? I would hear footsteps running to me on her carpet and get scared. At night I would see things move past in the hallway and this tall figure just standing in front of her door, and it was so tall that you couldn't see its head until it bent its neck inhumanely and stared at you under the door frame. It freaked me out so much that I woke her up crying, and we just started praying. I had a hand grab my leg and rip the blanket off. It got so bad to the point where we were too scared to go to the bathroom alone. At that point I told her parents about it, and they thought I was crazy because they never had anything like that happen. Until one day we were sitting at dinner and her dad asked, "Chloe, why were you sleeping all weird on the floor last night?" I was sleeping on the bed that night and had told him, and that's when he realized I was telling the truth, and we immediately just started praying to get rid of whatever was in the house to go away. Most of the things would happen late at night while mostly everyone was asleep. I'd if it was because I had a weaker mindset than them, and I'd what was in that house, but it was not nice, and it definitely messed me up to this day. I cannot sleep in pure silence, pitch black darkness, or even the door open at night. So I used to work for a company that would clean out foreclosed homes of people who moved or got evicted. Me and a few friends working with me on the job were throwing something heavy in the alley. This guy in a construction outfit walks up and tells us he was next door in the backyard and if we can come over really quickly. We go to the house next door's backyard with a guy, and he tells us to listen. He wants to make sure he's not crazy. Now we are in the backyard of the house next door. We were cleaning when all we hear is what sounded like a demon scream. The 3 of us go back to the alley scared, as the guy in the construction suit tells us he works with the guy who owns that house, and the owner told the guy he can have his cars. Now me and my buddy are freaked out. We go back inside the house we were supposed to be working on and get the project manager to tell him what happened. Now he didn't believe us, so we went next door in the backyard so he could hear what we all heard. Once it was quiet, we heard it scream again. The project manager tells us we're leaving immediately, this job is cancelled, and we left. We prayed over ourselves and left without finishing the job. Crazy thing is the house we were cleaning out looked as if the people were in a rush. It was food on the stove, plates on the table like a family was in the middle of dinner. It was very expensive items left behind. And none of this clicked for me until after the situation. Thanks for the time for listening to this situation. Happened about 8 years ago. I haven't had a supernatural experience that intense since then. There are forces beyond this world, and not all of them are good or should be used as an energy source. We heard the scream but were frozen in fear. We couldn't even bring ourselves to look at the window we heard the scream from, and we just backed away slowly into the alley. I have 4 friends who heard it. This all happened in broad daylight, BTW. Let me know your thoughts and opinions. This was a real life situation I never want to be in again and wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. It was as real as it gets for me, but if you have something to contradict, feel free. I'll read anything to believe I didn't hear a demon scream. So when I was 15, I stayed home from school sick one day. My family is pretty poor, and every adult in the house was at work and my older brother was at school, leaving me home alone with our 2 cats. My house was a small house with 3 bedrooms, all on the upper floor, with a very narrow hallway about 3 feet long and 2 feet across, 2 bedrooms on the left and the master plus the main bathroom on the right. So I woke up that morning around 12 to 12:30 to the front door of my house opening and wasn't startled by it. My stepdad and my mom both worked full-day shifts every day, so I figured one of them had had off that day and was home from running an errand or something. Upon hearing footsteps coming up the stairs, my bedroom was the one closest to the staircase. I figured it was my stepdad. He walked down the hallway to the master bedroom and into the ensuite, which I could tell because there was some noise and banging from the bathroom a few seconds after he entered. Now, the hallway bathroom didn't have a working toilet, so everyone who wanted to use a bathroom upstairs had to use theirs. The only other working one was in the basement. The banging continued for about 10 minutes and then stopped, and I suddenly heard footsteps thundering from the master down the stairs and out the front door, like he was sprinting. I thought nothing of it. My bedroom door closed and one of our cats in my lap purring away, so I lay in my room on my phone reading until I heard our screen door creaking open a little while later. I heard his footsteps coming heavily up the stairs again, but without the urgency of before. Now confused, and against my greater judgment, I stepped outside of my bedroom to see what the heck was going on. I looked down the stairs and saw no light coming from the side of the living room where the front door was, leading me to think it was closed even though I didn't hear him shut it. I turned to where the master bedroom was, and the light wasn't on inside. I looked down at the floor below, carpeted, and didn't see indications from where there would have been. Someone running and walking heavily with shoes on should have left. As a 15-year-old wimp, I was now terrified and retreated back into my bedroom. The banging from their bathroom, having been continuous as I was taking in my surroundings, stopped when I closed my door, and the footsteps returned, now stopping right outside my bedroom door. I remember clutching my cat to my chest and holding my breath, heart pounding as I waited for them to leave, and they finally did after about a minute or so, heading back down the steps and out the door, now shutting and locking the front door with them. I waited about 5 to 10 minutes before going out of my room again, cautiously going into the ensuite to see what all the banging was about, but it looked legitimately undisturbed from when I'd used it before bed the night before. Checking the living room and kitchen, I found the same results. I went back to my bedroom and somehow managed to fall asleep again, heart racing from my hours-long panic attack. Before I slept, I turned my phone on silent and put it in charge, seeing it was about 2 o'clock, about an hour and a half from when my older brother would come home from school. I shivered, hoping sleep would help me feel better, and drifted off. I awoke later to the front door opening again, arming myself with my acoustic guitar to go and see who was coming into the house. It was my older brother, and he asked me how my day had gone and if I was feeling better. My brother is a bit of a shit, so I didn't tell him about my terror-filled day, just saying I was fine and staying downstairs to watch YouTube on our PS4 with him, not wanting to be in my room until my family got home from work or until I'd finally calmed down. My mom and stepdad came through the front door at around 5 p.m., and I immediately asked them if they'd been off of work or if they came home during the day to do something or what, and they both said that they'd been at work all day and super busy, as my mom used to work delivery for Pizza Hut and a local Chinese restaurant, and my stepdad was an exterminator with a local place. To this day, only my grandmother knows this story, as I didn't tell my friends or anyone really about it until now. I kind of repressed it so as not to feel super unsafe in my house. But I do know that some people and a cat died in my house in the past, a couple, I believe. It could have been a fever dream or something similar. Why I don't play with Ouija boards anymore, 2 stories. The first story takes us back to the 00s. I was a little girl celebrating my friend's birthday. She always had a Halloween party to celebrate because that's when her birthday happened to be. She always talked about how her basement felt weird and she didn't like staying down there alone. Well, having 10 or so 10-year-old girls sleep over on Halloween night isn't exactly bedroom material, so her mom and grandma set us up in the basement. There, we played those weird games like light as a feather, stiff as a board and stuff. Fun fact, I was the only one we successfully levitated. I remember opening my eyes, and I was damn near the ceiling. It was spooky. When some of us started to get tired, we brought out the Ouija board. A few of our friends were scared, so they didn't want to participate. We asked innocent questions like kids usually do. Who is the birthday girl going to marry? How old are we going to be when we have children? Stuff like that. I remember I asked a question about myself, and it replied dead, which was weird. Some of the girls got spooked even more by that. Then a girl screamed and said she saw something behind me in the mirror. We stopped after that. For a few hours, 3 of us, including me and the birthday girl, couldn't sleep. We weren't sure if the board was real or not, so we decided we'd try one more time while everyone else was asleep, thinking that since they didn't want to play, it'd be better that way. We were close to 3 a.m. What we heard was the witching hour. Remember, we are about 10 or 11 years old, dumb, and have no idea what we're doing or who we're talking to. We asked the board if it could do something for us. We said at 3:15 a.m. to have the girl who saw something in the mirror wake up and say something to us. It was over 15 years ago, so I don't remember what we asked for this girl to say. All I know is we asked for her to look into the mirror and say it. 3:15 a.m. was about 20 or so minutes from when we asked the question. I remember us saying goodbye to the board and putting it away. The 3 of us were talking about how impossible our ask was when 3:15 a.m. hit. We knew it hit 3:15 a.m. because her basement had a big grandfather clock that didn't ring anymore, but the clock function still worked. We were waiting, and right before the time changed to 3:16 a.m., it happened. This girl shot straight up out of her blankets and looked straight at the mirror with her eyes closed. She whispered what we asked her to say, then dropped to her pillow like nothing ever happened. We all just looked at each other, frozen. No other girl that was sleeping stirred. None of them moved, not 1 centimeter. We were so freaked out that we didn't sleep until the sun came up, and in October in the Midwest, that's pretty late. We got 3 hours of sleep that night. This was my first ever Ouija board experience, and that changed the way I viewed spirits forever. I still think about it and feel guilty that I basically asked for one of my friends to be possessed. Needless to say, don't ever do that. Our second story comes nearly a decade after the first. I was a senior in high school, and one of my cheermates invited the whole team over to celebrate her birthday. I didn't know it, but she had an Ouija board. She brought it out, and I said nope, not a good idea. I guess her grandma had just died, and she was really torn up about it. I was very adamant that this wasn't a good idea and that we don't know if what we're talking to would be her grandma or not. She promised me she'd just try it twice and then she'd put it away. By this time, I knew a lot more than I did back during my first experience. I told her that she must say goodbye each time the girls rotated, and I had them put salt around the board to keep whatever they were talking to inside the board, so no one would or could get possessed. They tried it at least 4 times with different girls every time, and the planchet didn't move even once. They all laughed at me for how scared I acted earlier, saying that the board is stupid and doesn't actually work. I got kind of annoyed because some of them knew about my experience. I had shared it with the few who were already hesitant about the board when it was brought out. I asked, you know what? I'll do it, and I'll prove to everyone here that these boards are real. It was me, the birthday girl, who was a class below me, and 2 other girls from my class who only joined the team for our senior year. We put our fingers on the planchet and did the 3 circles to begin. I asked who we were talking to, and the planchet moved for the first time that night. The 2 girls in my class were huge skeptics. They said, of course it would move when I just said I'd prove it's real. They accused me of moving it, but the information that came out was something I never knew until they connected the dots for me. The board first goes to letter J, then to letter R. We were all confused, because Junior isn't a name or the name of anyone we knew. Or so we thought. We then asked why they were here, and the board spelled friend. We asked again, who is this? And the board spelled Junior. We then asked what J stands for, and the board spelled out JONAT, and one of the girls from my class screamed no way. We all looked at her in confusion. She asked, is this Jonathan Ramon? The planchet immediately moved to yes. The 2 girls sat so quietly, and we just waited. The birthday girl asked who Junior was, and the girl started to explain. Junior was a guy who was in the class above me. I knew of him, but nothing about him personally. I had been cheering at our school all 4 years, so I knew him from the football team. That was about all I knew of him. He had passed our sophomore year, his junior year, due to his car's exhaust. He didn't want to wake his parents after driving home from a party in the middle of winter, so he slept in his car with the car on in the garage. His parents found him the next morning. I remember it totally ripped apart his class. I remember his friends not showing up to school for at least 2 weeks out of grief, and we had a big celebration on the football field in the spring. Back to the Ouija board situation, the two girls in my class were panicked. They looked at me weird, and I said, well, it must be him coming through. They said no, that it's impossible because the board doesn't work, and that I'm making all this up and moving the planchette. They said I was a horrible person for impersonating Junior, and I said I wasn't, because I truly wasn't. I said, let's keep going and see what comes up. I knew they were friends of his and could validate the information that came through. They reluctantly agreed and feverishly asked a few more questions. They asked what his football number was. The planchette moved to 2 numbers, and the 2 girls were in shock. I looked at them questioningly, because again, I didn't know this about him. It had been 2 years since he passed, and I had no idea what his number was. I couldn't even remember which number the assigned player I had a few months before had. Then, they asked what color car he had. The board answered red, which was true. I at least remember the picture they had for his celebration was him in his red car because he loved the car. They then asked who my best friend was, and I had absolutely no idea who that would be. Again, we had similar friends, we were at the same places at the same time occasionally. But I never once spoke to this guy, and our mutuals didn't really talk to me about him because we really didn't have anything in common other than friends and the football/cheerleader type of association. The board spelled out his best friend's name. The guy was the only guy in our school with that first name, but we asked for the last name just to see if it would spell it correctly. And it did. The girls didn't even say goodbye, they flung the board at me. They called me a liar, saying I made all of this up. They were sobbing and screaming at me, it made me so uncomfortable. I was nothing but the tuner, the instrument that opened the veil for them, and they thought I was an awful person. The whole team fell silent, and I just left due to the discomfort. Even though I had been captain of our team and had cheered with the majority of those girls for at least 3 years, the majority of them didn't talk to me, even at practice, for at least 2 weeks. So many of them thought I was either crazy or disgusting. Only a few of them understood that I wouldn't have known based on who I was friends with at school and who I actually hung out with. Junior and I never truly crossed paths for conversation until that night, if it was actually him, that is. I think it was, but I do know that spirits can pretend to be someone and read our thoughts and memories with them. I don't use Ouija board anymore, because you never know who you're going to get or who you're going to piss off, even if it works. Now, I am a practicing energy reader and medium, so all of this type of stuff in my life has taught me about how to further connect, in a safe way, behind the veil. One day I was with my cousins, and we were riding our bikes around this abandoned track field with a bunch of trees. An hour or so passed, and this middle-aged man entered through the gate. He had an orange bag, a blue shirt, and some jeans on. He also had a black cap on. He sits down on a log and watches us the whole time. Me and my cousins were obviously creeped out and just ignored him. He seemed to be eating his food or whatever, so we just thought he was minding his business and we were just being paranoid. After like 3 hours, we were all pretty thirsty and tired. There was a store right around the corner where we could have gotten some snacks and drinks, so we decided to leave. It was getting late anyways. Mind you, the man was still there, just watching us. While leaving, I ran over a rock, and my bike leapt forward a little, almost knocking me off my bike. I laughed it off, and we went on. Once we reached the store, I reached inside my pocket for my phone. It wasn't there. I asked my cousins if they had it. They said no. So I frantically told my cousin to run back and check if I had dropped it, and he did. He comes back after 5 minutes, and there was no sign of my phone. I start freaking out, and I run back to the track field to look for it with my bike. I searched the grass, the trees, everything, but I still couldn't find my phone. Then I started realizing something. The man was still there, watching me frantically looking for my phone. He just stood there and stared at me. Both my cousins come back from the store and find me still looking for my phone. My older cousin finally pulled out her phone and tried to track mine down. Thankfully, I always had my location set. The GPS on her phone showed that my phone wasn't far away from me, and it was where I was at. I was about to declare victory until my cousin whispered in my ear, "What if that guy has it?" The idea wasn't completely absurd. He was actually sitting in the area where my phone claimed to be according to the GPS. But I just brushed it off and told her that I wasn't going to accuse a random stranger of stealing my phone. She calls me stupid, and we just kept searching. As I was still searching, my bigger cousin kept a close eye on the guy, who was still chilling over there. A few moments later, he starts walking away. My cousin looks down on her phone at the guy right when he started moving. My phone on her GPS started moving as well in the same direction he was moving, so my cousin taped my shoulder and showed me what was happening. I started to freak out, my heart dropped. I didn't have any idea how to deal with the situation. My cousin ended up telling me that we had to confront him or I would never have my phone back, and we cannot let him leave with it because it was my phone after all. So I did just that. I slowly ran up to him and approached him politely. "Excuse me, sir. Have you seen a pink phone anywhere?" He slowly turned around and just looked me up and down with this sinister mocking, smirking look on his face. He denied that he had ever seen a phone and started walking away. The GPS is literally moving once he starts walking away again. My cousin says this. At this point, I was pissed. Not the fact that he took my phone, but the fact that he lied to my face. He looked at me dead in the eyes and told me that he hadn't seen my phone. I gave him a chance to come clean. I could have been aggressive, but I wasn't. I was polite and patient. Even though he was the one with my phone. At this point I was pissed, so I screamed. "Hey, stop!" He stops in his tracks but slowly puts his hand in his pocket. I thought fast and assumed that he was going to pull out a weapon, so I stepped back. Not to my surprise, he pulls out my phone and hands it to me then, nervously laughing and apologizing. "You're lucky we didn't call the police." My cousin says this. The word police clearly scared him, and he starts apologizing, then he flees. My cousin was fuming, and so was I. I started cussing at him and yelling, and I was just overwhelmed about the situation. What would you have done in this situation? When I was 12, my family moved from a small city in southern Ohio, right off the downtown area, to a huge wooded expanse. Our nearest neighbor was a 5 to 10 minute walk in any given direction. The property was owned by my mom's boyfriend, and there were 2 houses on it. Ours, which was near the road and readily visible, with a workshop garage area near it, and his, way back off the main road and hidden well in trees. We'd visited there plenty of times, during the prior winter, where I did a lot of solitary exploration of the woods. That first summer was extremely lonely. It was the summer between 6th and 7th grade, and I just started making friends in our old town after having moved there the previous summer. My mom was, at the time, a respiratory therapist who still worked in that old town, so it was just me since my brother got thrown out literally a month after we moved there for domestic violence against both of us at different times. To occupy my time, I walked a lot, exploring the woods, finding little streams to sit and relax next to, fairly idyllic growing up in the country stuff. I had a Walkman tape player, headphones, and a couple tapes I could listen to on repeat over and over as I moved, but I only used it when I was on the road, just in case of snakes and the like. One day, Mom and her boyfriend went off to town to go get food and left me at the house alone. I told them I'd be going out for a walk. They told me to keep an eye out for traffic since these were old 2-lane roads with no sidewalks and to be back in the yard by dark. Now, it's important to mention that I'm a trans woman, and while I was assigned male at birth, I have never been very good at presenting as male, especially not as a prepubescent teen. Also, due to health issues when I was younger, I was small for my age. At the time I was, to a casual glance, I looked like a 10-year-old girl, not a 12-year-old boy. That year I had longish hair, thanks to not having found a new stylist since the move, and I'd gotten it into my head that really short cut-off jean shorts were the best and Mom simply hadn't cut them short enough for me, so I'd slowly frayed them shorter and shorter until Lara Croft would have been telling me to put some damn pants on. It was one of the million little ways I would defy masculine stereotypes of the mid-90s. So there I am, on a hot summer afternoon, with my headphones on and music playing at a moderate volume, cut-off shorts, a ratty old t-shirt that was way too big, walking down a mostly deserted country road. I got about a quarter mile from my house, having just climbed down the hill that my house was on top of, when a beat-up old truck slowed down as it passed me. It being the country and me having found everyone to be super friendly, I had a very casual wave and kept walking, turning down a side road, toward where Mom's boyfriend's brother lived. I'd occasionally walk by just to make sure he was out and about because the man was in his 70s and unsteady. His truck wasn't home, so I kept walking. The only other house in this stretch was at the end of the little road, where it connected with another. There was an old abandoned home. It was beautiful but sad because it was ruined, and it didn't need to have been ruined, in my eyes. That's when I noticed that same truck from before slowing down to crawl beside me. I pulled my headphones off and slowed myself, but I kept walking because I felt good and wanted to enjoy my day. In the truck were 3 guys, all older than me. The oldest looked to be about 25, the youngest maybe 16 or 17. The guy in the passenger seat was the youngest, and he leaned out to give me his biggest friendliest country boy smile. I was naive, but I wasn't naive enough to believe that smile. It set the hair on the back of my neck up, and I got a cold chill that just yelled at me to run. I'll be recreating the conversation as best as I can, but this was literally 24 years ago. "Hey there, you look lost. Live around here?" "Oh, I'm not lost, I'm just out for a walk." "Oh, you going somewhere?" "No, just getting a little exercise." I was trying to be nice because I'd learned through past experiences that when my instincts were telling me someone was up to no good, they were. "Thanks, big brother. You taught me not to run." "Oh, okay. Well, if you change your mind, we'll probably be back this way in a little bit." I smiled and nodded, waving to them as they headed off. By that point, we'd reached what would eventually become Mom's boyfriend's sister's plot of land. At the time, it was nothing but an empty, overgrown field. I watched the guys drive off and turn the corner, and then I immediately dove into the field. The voice yelling at me to run was getting louder, and the voice saying not to run was silent, so I took off through the field as fast as I could. I just hit the tree line and gotten into the trees when I heard that same truck coming back down the road, then a door slam. I heard one of the guys laughing really loudly, and another one let out a loud whoop a few seconds later. Damn, she took off like a duckin' rabbit. Well, y'all scared her, we're never going to have a party now. Now, at 12, I was very sheltered and knew very little about the birds and the bees, especially because I hadn't experienced any sort of puberty yet, thanks to the aforementioned health issues. The middle guy, who was probably about 20 and sweaty and gross, started walking toward the trees, following the very obvious trail I'd left. I'd only been in the area a month, but I already knew the woods pretty well. Moving as fast and as quietly as I could, I hurried off through the trees, sticking to the deer path that led across a little stream, up a hill, and into the deeper tree line. I knew there was a deer stand about midway between the field I'd come in through and our yard's back entrance, so I kept moving. It took me about half an hour to get through the woods back to the house, just because of the circuitous route I had to take to avoid the small mini cliffsides as we went up in elevation, the unevenness of the ground, and the occasional old fence line from back when it was all farmland a few generations back. I heard a lot of people crashing behind me for a minute or two when I first started moving, but back then I was fairly healthy, fast, and steady on my feet. I got home, locked the doors and windows, and pulled all the curtains closed in front of the windows. I saw that goddamn truck go by twice with those guys in it, but they never noticed me. Most of the other guys who would stop to check and make sure I was okay were sweet old men who didn't look like they'd hurt a fly, or neighbors I actually knew, who were sweet old folks who wouldn't hurt a fly. When I told my new classmate and friend about it, she told me I was really lucky I didn't get in that truck with them. She wouldn't elaborate though. I'm sharing about it now because an argument with said childhood friend brought up a lot of old memories. I met one of the guys, the youngest one, about 3 years later, when I was 15. He was the younger brother of my 23-year-old boyfriend. I know, freaking yikes. He didn't recognize me, I don't think, but I recognized him. Be safe out there. Hey guys, I'm on a spooky paranormal kick at the moment. It got me thinking of anything I've experienced. I do remember something from my childhood, but I cannot say for certain if it was anything genuinely paranormal. For context, at the time I was obsessed with Slenderman, and in my young, naive self, I halfway believed in the creepypasta to be real. I recall laying on my parents' bed one night. I was reading a Calvin and Hobbes collection. My parents' room has a connected bathroom and closet to my left. Both are quite small and next to each other. I remember looking up from the book towards the entrance of the bathroom, and I distinctly could see what I presumed to be a pale, featureless face quickly darting behind the wall of the bathroom. It happened like that. It vanished in an instant. I did not know what to make of it at the time, but I definitely felt a tad bit unnerved. Not being sure if what I saw was real. Nothing else happened after that, though. Am I saying it was the Slender Man? No, that would be stupid. Am I saying it was paranormal? I'm not quite sure. It's more than possible, and more likely I imagined it or something of the sort. The only reason I share this is because it felt so real, and it truly felt like whatever darted its head to hide from me was really physically there. Spooky to think about sometimes. Hey all, an odd and mildly creepy encounter I had a few years ago with my buddy along the Cedar River a bit south of Lake Washington. He and I were in the service at the time and living in Seattle, both 22 to 23 guys who were pretty fit and into hiking and backpacking, and he was into fishing as well too. We both loved getting outside for anything, so he offered to show me how to fly fish over the weekend. I had never gotten into fishing much before, but I thought it'd be a cool way to explore some more of the area off the track and have a few beers along the way. It had rained recently, and it was a beautiful day, so all the relatively low parts of the river were packed with other fishermen. My buddy was a bit pissed, but he expected as much, so we headed farther down the river and did a lap on the road running next to it looking for a spot. Eventually, we settled on a place where the water seemed a bit high and swift to me. I trusted my buddy, he'd know what was fairly safe and fishable, but we only saw a few cars there and no one visibly out in this area. We got out, started suiting up in waders, and got our gear out in the back of his Jeep when another guy slowly pulled up in a beater truck and then parked a few spaces down. We were still getting ready when this guy walked up to us and started asking if we had any luck today and where we planned on fishing along the river. He was super enthusiastic, only a few years older than us, it seemed, and was kitted out in some pretty used-looking fishing gear with a big fixed-blade buck knife on his hip. At first we attempted to pass small talk, but he just kept going, and it didn't end naturally. He eventually told us there was a tributary that flowed into around where we were at, and he always fished upstream of it into the hills a bit and had good luck up there and wanted us to join him. I was pretty new in this world, but I've known a few hunters/fishers who were friends, and this kind of threw a red flag for me. The ones I knew would fervently hide their best spots, whether they were local, legal, or not. This especially weirded me out because he was so insistent, and we just met him. My buddy and I declined, but we were in a weird spot to get up and leave as we were both suited up and clearly intending to fish as we had rods in hand. Even with giving him excuses that we thought the river was too high and that we were happy in this area, he persisted in wanting to fish with us right off this bank. We didn't know what to do other than give it a try, which was kind of dumb, but we were young, and there were two of us and one of him. On top of that, my buddy was pretty imposing. He was only about the same height as me, 5'10", but was naturally super muscular and real square-jawed, just super sturdy looking. We all called him Big Country because of this and that he had a slow drawl from the Carolinas. While the guy was talking and before we went in, we both looked at each other in a kind of acknowledgement of the weirdness of the situation and that things might go south. The guy led us into Cedar River, and Big Country followed him while I tried to bring up the rear. The river was up knee-high at least when we got in, and about half thigh-high at least as we tried to work our way into the center. The guy kept waving and hollering to have us follow him deeper, but only my buddy did. My cheap waders had no traction underfoot, and I was battling already for purchase on the stream edge. I tried, but after a step or two I'd be fighting not to tumble in and drop back to the bank and hold onto the tree roots there and just follow them downstream the little bit we went along the bank. Eventually my buddy called it, turned around almost midstream, and plunged back towards me and the bank. We both got out safely after a bit of work to get back upstream, said we'd move on, and that we didn't trust the guy as we headed towards the car. We noted not only was he so persistent, but he seemed experienced too, and the current was really too fast to be fishable. We got to the lot and were peeling our waders and jackets off so we wouldn't soak the seats in my buddy's Jeep when the guy tramped out from the direction of the river and threw his fishing pole in the back of his truck before getting in. He then proceeded to pull up next to us while we were finishing changing and told us there was a fire road down the way a bit off the highway that he always fished at too, and was sure we'd have better luck there and that the water would be calmer. We declined and said we wanted to head a bit more south away from everyone, but he really insisted that we come even though we kept brushing it off. Eventually we told him, thanks, but we're going to head off as we got into our Jeep, and he finally pulled off. Alone again, my buddy looked at me and said something like, "That was ducking weird. That's how all the serial killer stories start. Did you see his knife?" And I agreed. I mentioned how weird it was he wanted to share his private spots, and my buddy agreed. We did a lap down the road, but everywhere else was too packed, and we called it a day and headed home. I don't know about the knife. I always carry one hiking, but it's usually a folding blade and a bit less prominent, and then the one the guy had wasn't a special skinning/dressing knife, just a big old-fashioned buck that gave me a bit of a weird feeling. Both of our guts told us something was ducked. This is my first time sharing. Do you guys feel the same? I'm not a paranoid kind of person. I'm quite rational, even though I have a healthy interest in true crime, the strange, and the paranormal. I've driven across the country many times and stayed in really sketchy places due to moving locations for the service, but I've only had a few strange incidents like this. I've had a few others, but this one definitely stuck out in my mind. When I was a 16 to 17-year-old girl, I would babysit for a set of twin 8-year-olds that lived across the street from me. It was the ideal summer job. I ferried them to and from various activities, and in between, we spent nearly every second outside. Every day was a new adventure. Adding to the fun, the twins' family owned a medium-sized, sweet-as-pie poodle mix who loved people more than anything. This dog was incredibly smart, gentle, and loving. She wouldn't have harmed a fly. We could count on her to go on adventures with us. She would follow us at a far pace, exploring on her own but always keeping us within earshot. Whenever we met new people, she would gleefully bound towards them, eager to lick them and get pets and express just how happy she was to see them. She was the best. I remember one late summer morning, we decided to spend a few hours drawing on the front driveway in chalk. The kids drew, and rolled up and down the street on their scooters, while I laid on the driveway with the dog, soaking up the heat. Not many adults were around, it was a weekday, and most were at work, but we couldn't have felt safer in the midday sun in the safety of our suburb. Occasionally a neighbor would walk down the street, and the dog would sidle up to them in greeting, while I spent a few minutes making small talk. This continued for a while, and I was getting really relaxed by the heat and the sound of the kids playing and laughing. The dog was resting beside me, dozing, when suddenly I heard a low growl coming from her. It was a noise I'd never heard her make before, and it took me by surprise. I sat up and looked around immediately, and there, coming down the sidewalk towards me and the kids, was a man I'd never seen before. He was older and a bit haggard looking, and he was watching us like a hawk. The dog was having none of him, and her growl slowly got louder and more intense as he meandered towards us. This should have been a sign to me, but I didn't know anything. I was 17 and too young to understand to trust my gut. All I knew was to be polite. He stopped, with a laser focus on me, and started trying to have a conversation with me. This was normal, other people had walked by and done the same throughout the morning, but he was asking weirder questions. Questions about our plans for the day, what I was doing with the kids, where their parents were, etc. It was unnerving, but he was an adult, so I tried to answer in as polite but vague a way as possible. He kept trying to get closer to me. The children were mercifully racing away on their scooters for most of this experience, and his gaze turned into something more like a leer. Anytime he moved near, though, the dog would growl louder, and she started barking viciously. I had never seen her act like this, and it actually got to a point where I was holding her back and trying to calm her down, all while apologizing for her behavior. He faltered in her presence. Even though she wasn't big, she was standing her ground and protecting me, even though the threat hadn't materialized in my mind. Just as quickly as he had been coming closer, he backed off, said a quick goodbye, and hurried away down the street. I never saw him again, and in the many years I babysat for that family, I never saw their dog behave that way either. I have always wondered if she sensed some threat from him that I wasn't able to pick up on that day. I truly think that she protected me, and the kids, from something awful. It could have been nothing, and y'all listening this may think it's silly to even write about, but I have never forgotten that encounter. At the end of May 1987, while my parents were on vacation, I was taking care of the haunted house I had lived in from 1979 till 1985. By this time the poltergeist activity had decreased to almost nothing, but I was still scared to be in the house alone, especially at night. I called a friend of mine and asked him if he would mind staying there with me when he could while my parents were gone. I had told him quite a few stories about the activity in that house and barn in the past, so I used the possibility of a paranormal encounter to lure him into staying. He, fortunately for him, had never experienced anything he would consider paranormal before but was still interested and not skeptical. So he agreed to stay that night. While I was waiting for him to arrive, my brother called to see if I was going to be staying there that night so he could hang out with his friends. I confirmed that I was and also told him I was having my friend over to possibly have his first paranormal experience. My brother thought that was a good idea, so he decided to mention that to his friends to see if they wanted to join in for an experience of their own. One of his friends had an Ouija board and thought that was a great place to try it out, so they agreed. My brother arrived with his two friends first, and we walked around outside, telling his friends about experiences we had there and in the barn. One of his friends was a skeptic, so he wasn't believing anything me and my brother were talking about. The other was like my friend. He hadn't experienced anything in his life but still had an open mind. While we were talking, my friend finally arrived, so I went to his car to greet him. He had his girlfriend with him, so I asked if he was still planning on staying the night. He said yes, as long as his girlfriend could stay as well. I didn't mind as long as she was aware of my reason for having him stay. I told her that strange things may happen that might be scary to someone who has never had those experiences before. She was also a skeptic, so she agreed to stay, saying nothing was going to happen anyway. While my brother and his friends were still outside, I took my friend and his girlfriend upstairs to show him where they could sleep. After showing them, I started telling stories about the house to prepare them for what could possibly happen during the night. The only thing I was expecting would happen was the attic door would shake and make noise like it had done almost every night while I was living there. We went into the attic so I could show them what was there while still talking about past experiences in the house and barn. There was a stack of old encyclopedias on the floor that was in disarray, with one on the floor. I picked up the one from the floor and placed it on top of the stack and then straightened up the stack while finishing my stories of past experiences. Afterward, I went back downstairs to see what my brother was doing. My friend stayed upstairs with his girlfriend so they could be alone. When I got downstairs, I saw that they had already set up the Ouija board on the table and even had a few candles on the table around it. The table was in the dining room at the bottom of the stairs. I closed the staircase door and sat down in the empty chair in front of me, facing away from the door. My brother and his two friends were already sitting in the other chairs. We lit the candles, put our fingers on the planchette, and began asking questions. The planchette was moving with all our hands on it, answering our questions. I wasn't moving it, but I did think someone in our group was. I didn't believe Ouija boards were anything more than a novelty. While playing with the board, we heard someone walking on the stairs, which caused all four of us to look at the staircase door. I didn't think anything of it since my friend and his girlfriend were still upstairs. I just figured they were coming down. But after a little time, he hadn't opened the door. So I opened the door and saw he wasn't there. I then went up and asked him if he had gone down the stairs, and he told me that he and his girlfriend hadn't moved from the couch they were sitting on. He told me that he thought one of us was coming upstairs because they heard it also. 6 people heard someone walking on the stairs when there was no one on the stairs. My brother's skeptical friend was really spooked after that. We had to convince him not to just leave. His other friend was intrigued, thinking it was the coolest thing he'd experienced up to that point. My brother and I were used to that sort of thing, so it didn't faze us at all. After convincing his friend to stay, we went back to playing with the Ouija board. It was answering questions again, and I still thought somebody was moving the planchette. Then the intrigued friend asked whoever was answering to put out one of the candles. Within 5 seconds, one of the candles just burned out. There was no moving air in the room, plus all the other candles were still burning without any motion indicating moving air. The spooked skeptical friend screamed and started running for the door, still screaming. The other friend followed him and my brother after that. I shouldn't have been, but I was laughing at the guy's reaction. Even though it was spooky, I never expected a big guy like him to scream like that. I went outside to find my brother's friends getting in the car to leave. I said we can't stop without saying goodbye on the Ouija board just in case the superstition is true. My brother's friends were not willing to go back in the house though, so my brother and I went in and said goodbye. They left right after that, without the Ouija board. I went back inside and blew out the remaining candles. Then I went upstairs to tell my friend and his girlfriend what just happened since I knew they had to have heard the screaming. We sat upstairs talking until nighttime. Nothing happened until after midnight, when the attic door began moving. Like I mentioned before, this was a usual occurrence in that house, so I was used to it. My friend's girlfriend was getting really scared by this, though. She didn't believe things like this could happen, and here it was happening. It took a bit of convincing to get her to stay, but she did at that point. The attic door was shaking and making noise the whole time. After a bit of time, there was a loud noise that came from inside the attic that sounded like something being dragged across the floor. Then the sound of knocking from within. Once again, we had to talk his girlfriend into not leaving even while the door rattling and knocking was still going on. After a few minutes, there was a loud thud that sounded like someone had dropped a book flat onto the wooden floor. That was it for his girlfriend. There was no talking her into staying now. She ran downstairs with us right behind her. She told my friend she would be back to pick him up in the morning, and she left. We went back inside and slept downstairs. When we got up, I just had to look in the attic to see where that loud noise came from. When I looked in, the first thing I noticed was the stack of encyclopedias was no longer straightened up, and the one I picked up was right back on the floor. I can't say for sure if any of this was brought on by the Ouija board, but that was more occurrences in one day witnessed by more people than there had ever been in that house before. The Whistling Man. I was 15 years old at the time and out to a weekend afternoon movie with my friend. We were really early, so we decided to look around a nearby toy store to kill some time before the previews began. I was strolling absent-mindedly down an aisle by myself, looking at toys I felt far too old for, when I heard an odd whistle. If you've ever heard the iPhone notification chime, then you have an idea of the sound I heard. I thought nothing of it, maybe it was someone's phone, and I moved through the aisles, eventually meeting back up with my friend. We walked around a bit more, talking and laughing, and I heard that whistle once again. Being preoccupied with my conversation more than anything, I still didn't pay it any mind. On our way out of the store, I heard the whistle for a third time but much closer, practically right over my shoulder, and I whipped around mid-sentence. A man stood there, grinning from ear to ear in a strangely sinister way. The smile didn't fully reach his eyes. He was a bit on the small side, scraggly with long hair tied back in a low ponytail. He had on a tattered black t-shirt that hung loosely off his thin frame and a bulging, black drawstring backpack. "Hi," he said, stretching his lips even wider around his contrastingly bright white teeth. As a teenage girl, I was no stranger to the attention of older men, but something about his persona and approach set me on edge. Still, I was taught to be polite. "Hi," I responded tentatively, taking a step backwards and away from his intense stare. I've noticed you around the store and thought I could get your opinion on something. He unfurls a crumpled, stained copy of the toy store's weekly ad and pointedly stabs at the Barbie doll selection with his index finger. See, I'm looking for the perfect doll for my niece, and I just have no idea which one to pick. What do you think? He looks up and smiles, but his eyes are dark pools of nothingness, devoid of any real interest. This one is nice, I say, pointing to a doll at random, hardly looking at the ad. Wow, thank you, I really appreciate that. Hey, has anyone ever told you how pretty you are? You must go to the gym on a regular basis. What gym do you go to? Taken aback by his abrupt stream of rehearsed sounding pickup lines, I say thank you and force a laugh. I'm young, and so is my friend. Our inexperience and his strange approach keep us frozen in place. His eyes bore only into mine, and his grin, wider still and deeply disconcerting, never fades from his face. Hey, do you want to be friends? I'd like very much to be friends with you. Do you know what friends do? They take pictures together. Let's take a picture together since we're friends. He holds up a red flip phone with the front cover held together by a rubber band. He activates the front-facing camera, and before I can say anything, he leans into me, faces uncomfortably close, and snaps the picture. He looks at it briefly, smiles, and pockets his phone. There now, we're friends, he says matter-of-factly and turns his gaze back to me, appraisingly. Stupidly, in a horrified daze, I nod. So where are you from? Where are you going after this? What do you want to do? My friend puts her hand on my arm, and I suddenly break from my stupor. We have to go, my dad's waiting, I say, and we turn to go. My last, but not final, glimpse of him is with his head cocked to the side and that wide smile spread across his face. His eyes now flicker with something I can only recall as amusement. We turn our backs, and as soon as we get far enough away, we run. Fast forward to a year and a half later. I'm in my junior year of high school and on the early morning city bus heading to my first class of the day. The bus is packed, and I squeeze my way to the back, reaching out a hand to grab the pole as the bus brakes sharply. I hear a whistle close to my ear. When I hear it again, I adjust the earbuds in my ears. Why isn't that person answering their phone? A hand closes right above mine on the pole. It is too close, and our fingers brush, but the person holds their hand there almost intentionally. I move my hand and glance up and into the broad smile of the creepy man from the toy store. Cold chills shoot down my spine, and I grip the pole even harder until my knuckles turn white. He tilts his head, still smiling his toothy grin, and says, "Hi, friend." The bus is so jam-packed that there's nowhere else for me to go, so I turn my body as far away from him as possible, hoping that playing dumb would work in my favor and he would go away. He leans closer still and says, "Hi, do you remember me?" I shake my head no and lean as far away as I can in the tight space. He frowns and looks suddenly angry. "No, I know you. We met before. We're friends." I shake my head again, looking down, pretending to be engrossed in my music player. Maybe if he didn't get a full look at my face, he might think he had me confused with someone else. "No, I have your picture," he says and reaches into his drawstring bag, pulling out his red flip phone held together by frayed rubber bands. All the while I'm thinking, if he sees me get off at the stop to my school, he'll know where I am every day and can find me easily, but if I get off at a random stop before my school, he could get off with me, and I have nowhere else to go. He's still scrolling through his phone, and I'm imagining all the other girls' pictures he might have on there when he asks, "So, what school do you go to?" I think about saying mind your own business but remember his angry frown from before and give him the name of another school. It doesn't really make sense because this bus only goes past one high school, not the one I told him, but he nods at this and says, "Hold on, I have your picture somewhere here." We're friends. The bus pulls up to my high school, and there's nothing else I can do but get off. While he's still preoccupied with his phone, I lose myself in the crowd and run all the way to school. I'm shivering when I get to my first period classroom, and I can hear the blood rushing in my ears. I ask my boyfriend to take the bus with me every morning for the next few weeks, and I change up my route going to and from, but I don't see him again until 2 years later, and I am a sophomore in college. I am taking the bus home alone after a late night out with friends when I hear a weird whistle. Enough time has passed so that I don't feel much alarm and exit the bus at my stop. It is completely dark out, and I am one of two people who get off. Then from behind me I hear, "Hello there, do you remember me?" I turn around, and it's him again. It's difficult to make out his features in the dark, but I instantly remember the tone of his voice, the whistle, the tiled head, and the wide, toothy smile. I see what looks like a backpack strapped to the front of his chest. "No," I say, and start walking faster, heart racing, wondering how fast I can run in these flip-flops. I hear him picking up speed behind me, and I dare to glance back. I glimpse him starting to run at me, his hands in his backpack, digging around for something that I don't want to know. He is angry now, his smile gone, and he shouts at me, "So you want to be that way?" I start running and don't stop until I get home. So, to the whistling man with the backpack, no, I do not want to be your friend. I've always been fascinated by the paranormal and the unknown. Just last night, while recounting past family holidays, I had been reminded by my sister of a pretty unexplained event she had experienced. Taking place back in 2018, me and my family took a small trip to Weymouth, a seaside town in Dorset, UK. We were staying in a very old cottage at the top of a cliff on a popular hiking trail, but it was pretty much in the middle of nowhere, about a mile from any other building, surrounded by trees and wooded areas near a quiet beach. The cottage itself was super dated inside and gave off a bit of an eerie vibe, but I put that down to the old decor with large wooden bolted doors and stone floors with an old piano straight from a church. We stayed for a week, and nothing really spooky had happened over this time. However, on the final night, my sister, who was 16 at the time, was sleeping downstairs in the living room by herself and had an experience that none of us can explain. To set the scene, the layout had me and my partner upstairs, opposite my parents' bedroom, the stairs being incredibly old and loud, so a single step you would hear, and then my older sister and her partner were staying in a room on the other side of the cottage, nowhere near the front room. From what she described, she was sitting up Snapchatting her boyfriend all night, and then around 3 a.m., she swears, suddenly the door began to shake as if someone was trying to get in but obviously couldn't due to it being bolted. This happened for approximately 30 seconds to a minute with the door shaking so much that the wall also began to shake, during which she called out for our mom and dad, thinking it was either of them checking to see if she was okay and asleep. However, when she called out, no one replied, and she then didn't hear anything, no footsteps, nor any sound. This is where she, for some reason, decided to go and check. She went through to the other section of the cottage to see if it was our older sister or her partner, but they were fast asleep, and if it was, by the time she left the room, she probably would have seen them walking back. She then checked upstairs, where again everyone was fast asleep. All she said was the rooms had become even colder than they already were and the house was eerily silent. She went back to her room and, from what she said, locked the doors again and managed to get some sleep. The next morning came, and she had mentioned it to me before saying to any of the family, as she knew I would be intrigued and would take less convincing over the others, but when she decided to talk about it at breakfast just to see if anyone came down the stairs, everyone stayed in bed. Me personally and my partner are very heavy sleepers, as is my dad, and we knew we didn't get up for the toilet or anything, especially since the toilet was on the other side of the cottage where my older sister was, meaning we would have to walk through a dark and eerie hallway to get there, which didn't really appeal to us. When discussing my mom, who also is a believer in the supernatural and has claimed many experiences, she went a bit pale and looked spooked. When asked, she said that she woke up but didn't know the time as she felt pressure at the end of her bed next to her foot. When looking up, she could see a shadow at the end of the bed sitting down. She said she looked next to her as though it were my dad, but he was next to her fast asleep. Thinking it was just as she was still tired, she went back to sleep. At this point, she heard my sister open the door and walk up the stairs just as she was drifting off. Though there may be an explanation, I can't think of any, having covered most things from sleepwalking to just being a family member. My sister, who is adamant she experienced it, had the text to her boyfriend as it was going on to prove it wasn't a dream, as well as my mom having experiences. Overall, to me, it's pretty creepy. Something else that me and my partner also found pretty odd when packing to leave, as we were doing the last checks before leaving in the back rooms where my older sister and her partner were staying. There were a lot of crosses hanging up as well as one in the bathroom we never noticed that was hanging upside down. I am male, 29 years old, living in the US in the New England area. I live with my folks, and our house isn't super secluded or anything, but we do have 2 acres of land surrounded by woods in our backyard down a rather steep hill. This happened about 6 years ago now, and nothing like this has happened since. I was home alone for the weekend as my folks had gone to visit my older brother out of state, and I was tasked with taking care of our animals, including chickens, ducks, geese, and our beloved canine companions. We have always had way too many dogs, and at this time we had 10 of them, so taking care of them was a job all on its own. My family had left Thursday evening, and most of Friday passed without incident, until around 12:30 Friday night. I was still awake in my bedroom on the computer browsing around when my pit bull, who we had affectionately named Butters, began to whine at my door wanting to go for a walk. I didn't mind as it was July and the temperature outside was perfect for a nice midnight walk. I grabbed his leash, collar, and flashlight and headed downstairs as he followed excitedly. We made our way outside, down the hill, across the field, and onto a trail I used frequently for this purpose. The trail led through the woods and into a clearing with a pond and another trail that led even deeper into the woods. Butters still hadn't gone to the bathroom yet, so I continued down the other trail at the same time, letting go of the leash as I knew he liked to go off the trail a bit to take care of business. Butters took off ahead of me a ways, but he always knew to stay within eyesight. Finally he took care of business, and I had called him over to me so I could take hold of his leash again and start heading back when he stopped in his tracks. His ears perked up, and his tail went rigid. He began to growl and raise his hackles while looking further down the dark and twisty path of the trail. I called him over again, worried that he was going to take off into the night after a squirrel or something, but he completely ignored me. He was totally focused on something further down the trail. I began to approach him, hoping to grab hold of his leash, but as I started towards him, he took off like a bolt of lightning down the trail, barking like a frantic dog into the darkness ahead. I started running after him, hoping he would stop, but he was too fast, and before I knew it, he was completely gone from sight. I could still hear him barking in the distance, but it was faint, and soon enough I could no longer hear him either. I stopped running to catch my breath, as I knew trying to catch up to him was a futile effort at this point. I started calling out to him while continuing to walk down the path, shining my flashlight into the woods, hoping to spot him nearby or something. I was starting to worry as he usually never acted like this. I mean, sure, he had run off on a walk before but had always come right back when called. I wasn't walking for long before I heard something coming from further down the trail. I aimed my flashlight in the direction the sound was coming from. It sounded like something bounding down the path towards me, but I couldn't see anything. Suddenly Butters came flying out of the woods and down the path towards me. I thought he would stop at my feet so I could grab his leash, but he blasted right past me and almost knocked me over. I started to feel like something was wrong, as I couldn't imagine what had my 120-pound pit bull so spooked. I spun around after him shouting at him to stop, but just like before, he wasn't listening, and soon he was out of sight again. Now I was alone in the darkness, without my buddy to protect me from whatever it was that had him running. At least he was headed towards the house this time. I hoped that he would come back at some point so I wouldn't have to walk the trail alone, but I didn't hear him at all. In fact, it was eerily quiet, no crickets chirping, just an ominous quiet. Needless to say, I wanted to get out there as soon as possible. As I made my way onward, I spotted something in the darkness ahead of me. I couldn't tell what it was exactly. I called out to Butters, hoping it was him, but whatever it was, it didn't react to me at all. I felt very uneasy all of a sudden as a chill shot down my spine and a cold sweat began to form all over my body. I moved closer, hoping to be able to see it more clearly as I slowly raised my flashlight towards it, the light gradually revealing the path ahead until I could see the boots of someone standing on the trail. I jerked the light upwards to reveal a man standing there facing towards me. This guy was huge, built like a brick wall, and very tall. I'm 6 feet 1 inch, and this guy looked like he towered over me from where I was standing. He had long, scraggly brown hair and a long, dirty brown beard with bits of leaves and dirt stuck inside it. His jacket was covered in dirt, and his jeans were ripped and heavily stained with God only knows what. He was standing sort of half-cocked, swaying back and forth in place like a drunk. This was private property, but even if it wasn't, it would still be very odd to see someone hanging out in the woods at night. It was very dark and pretty much impossible to see without a light of some kind. I felt nauseous as my stomach dropped suddenly, my knees felt weak, and I thought about running, but whoever this man was, he was standing between me and the way back home. I just kind of stood there, my flashlight still shining in his face. He didn't react at all, not even to shield his eyes from the light. It was as if he were in some sort of trance. I don't even think he was aware of my presence at all until I called out to him, just a simple "Hey, are you all right?" I didn't have time to finish what I was saying. The sound of my voice seemed to break him out of his trance, and to my surprise and absolute terror, he began sprinting towards me, screaming like a madman. I stumbled backwards and almost fell over as I turned around to run back down the path, his boots stomping on the ground, his frantic screaming approaching fast. He was absolutely crazed, like a rabid animal, as he chased me down the trail, further and further away from home. I was panicked at this point, my heart was pounding away in my chest as adrenaline coursed through my veins. I was really scared, as I couldn't imagine what this man was going to do to me if he caught me. I knew I couldn't keep running in this direction, as the trail eventually peters out and sort of dissolves into the woods after a certain point. I thought maybe I could lose him if I turned off my light and hopped off the trail to hide and let him pass. The man had stopped screaming, and I dared to steal a quick glance behind me. I could see that the man was still keeping pace with me. I shut off my light and pushed myself as hard as I could, hoping to gain a bit more distance between us. The path turned ahead, and I thought if I could get around that corner and hide before he caught up, I might be okay. I had never run so hard and so fast in all of my life, and it was beginning to take its toll on my lungs. I had asthma, and it was getting harder to breathe. When I felt like I had gotten far enough ahead of him, I jumped off the trail and hid behind a large pine tree, just at the outside edge of the path. I pressed myself up against the tree and tried to quiet my heavy breathing as much as I could. It wasn't long before this crazy bastard came bounding around the corner. He was a lot closer than I had thought, and I hoped he hadn't seen me turn off the trail to hide. He stopped about 5 feet away from my hiding place and began searching around for me. I really didn't want this guy to find me, but I was too afraid to move. He started shouting incoherently and violently thrashed about in the brush just a few feet from me. I had to keep him away from me. I slowly bent down against the tree and felt around the ground for a rock or a stick, anything I could throw to distract him. Luckily my hands found a good-sized stone, and I took hold of it and waited for a break in the noise he was making. I wanted to be sure he would hear it when I threw it. In between the sounds of his thrashing and growling, I tossed the stone away from me and across the trail. It smacked into a tree across the way and fell to the forest floor with a thud. The crazy man stood upright and took off in the direction of the sound, still thrashing about violently and shouting gibberish. I wasted no time and quickly but carefully made my way back onto the trail and took off sprinting towards home. I kept my flashlight on as I was scared I might trip over something. I wasn't running for long when, to my horror, I heard the maddening screams of the madman chasing behind me yet again. I was exhausted and still pretty out of breath from earlier, but the man hadn't slowed at all. If anything, he was even faster than ever. I was giving it my all, but I could tell he was gaining on me fast. I had made it to the clearing, past the pond, and onto the small trail that led to my backyard. I practically launched myself down the trail. I could see the light from my house at the top of the hill, and the man was laughing as he chased close behind. I blasted out of the trail and into my yard quickly, making my way across the field. I got halfway up the hill when I realized I couldn't hear the man anymore. I took a quick look behind me and stopped in surprise. The man was no longer chasing me, he had stopped at the entrance to the trail and was just standing there looking at me. I shined my light at him, and he gave me the creepiest smile and waved at me as if we had been playing some kind of game that he'd lost, and then he simply turned around and walked back into the woods. I made it back to the house to find Butters waiting at the door like nothing had ever happened, wagging his tail, excited to see me. I rushed inside to call the cops, and they sent a couple officers over. I described the man to them, and they searched around the area but didn't find anything. Thankfully, though, they stayed and patrolled the neighborhood for the rest of the night, and that made me feel pretty safe. I don't really know what more they could have done in the dark anyway. I couldn't stay mad at Butters for bailing on me, I was just too happy and relieved that we were both home and safe. I never expected anything like that to happen so close to home on our private property. From that point on, I never went for any midnight walks without a knife and some pepper spray. I am a major skeptic, but this crazy thing happened to me. My significant other and I were looking for haunted hiking trails to explore with a friend of ours. I forget which trail we decided on, I can find out if anyone is actually curious, but we settled on a supposedly haunted forest in Massachusetts. The night before the hike, I had an incredibly vivid dream that the three of us were in a strange outdoor pool in the woods. It was a bizarre place. It was a bottomless pit of water, probably 8 feet in diameter. It was essentially a pool of water with regular stones surrounding it in a meticulous manner for no apparent reason. The fact that it was bottomless sincerely bothered me, but everyone was complaining that I was just being paranoid and that I actually needed to wade further into the pool. Over time, they got weird about it, to the point where I began to panic that something was seriously wrong. It escalated to the point where they attempted to drag me under with a terrible, irresistible force, and I woke up in a sweat. Of course, I woke up and immediately told my so about it. I don't think I have ever woken up in a sweat like that in my entire life, but the dream was just too real. After a while, I calmed down and prepared to go on the hike. The hike itself was pretty normal. I'm a skeptic, so honestly, I was not really worried at all, but my so and our friend were both psyching each other up about it, and I played along because I didn't want to be a downer. Until I saw the pool from my dream. I was absolutely freaked out. It was a perfect match. The bottomlessness was also featured via dark leaves that lined the bottom, making it look bottomless. I know it's a minor thing to have happened, but I really can't explain how that pool was in my dream or why I felt such a super bad feeling about it.